At 12:47 a.m., Meridian Dynamics' entire AI infrastructure began eating itself alive. Every federal security system connected to their network started failing simultaneously. Doors locked employees inside, backup generators screamed, and the 30-year-old CEO who'd fired their underperforming janitor 8 hours earlier was about to discover that the exhausted single father she'd dismissed without a second thought was the only person on Earth who could stop the collapse, because he'd built the whole damn thing. But before we get there, let me tell you how we arrived at this disaster. If you're enjoying this story, hit that like button and drop a comment with your city so I can see how far this tale travels. Now, let's rewind to where it all started going wrong. The fluorescent lights in Conference Room B had the kind of sterile brightness that made everything feel like an interrogation. Ethan Cole sat across from three people who'd already decided his fate before he walked through the door. His canvas backpack, older than most of the equipment in the building, rested against his chair leg. Coffee stains marked the cuff of his work shirt. He hadn't slept in 26 hours. Vanessa Whitmore, Meridian Dynamics' newly appointed CEO, sat directly across from him. 30 years old. Stanford MBA. 6 weeks into the job. Her tablet displayed performance metrics that painted Ethan as exactly what she'd expected to find: dead weight. Mr. Cole. She didn't look up from the screen. Thank you for coming in early. Ethan glanced at the wall clock. 6:15 a.m. He'd never left. This was still his night shift. Sure, he said. To Vanessa's left sat Marcus Chen from HR, a man whose entire personality could be summarized as corporate liability management. To her right was Gerald Hoffman, the new VP of Operations, who'd spent the last month generating reports about efficiency optimization that really just meant finding people to fire. We're making some structural changes, Vanessa began. Meridian is moving into a new phase of growth, and we need our team to reflect that direction. Ethan said nothing. He'd heard this speech before, at other companies, in other conference rooms. The words changed, but the music stayed the same. Gerald leaned forward, hands clasped like a guidance counselor about to deliver disappointing news. Your performance reviews over the past 18 months show concerning patterns. Multiple instances of sleeping during work hours, incomplete maintenance logs, missed team meetings. I work nights, Ethan said quietly. There aren't team meetings at 3 a.m. You were invited to transition to day shifts twice, Marcus added, consulting his own tablet. You declined both times. I have a daughter. She needs me during the day. Vanessa's eyes finally lifted from the screen. Mr. Cole, we're sympathetic to your personal situation, but Meridian requires employees who can fully commit to our operational needs. Your attendance record shows 17 instances of leaving work early over the past year. Medical emergencies, Ethan said. My daughter has a heart condition. It's documented with HR. Marcus shifted uncomfortably. While we certainly understand that's difficult, the frequency of these incidents creates reliability issues for your team. I don't have a team. I work alone. The overnight maintenance rotation has been a one-person shift for 2 years. Gerald pulled up another document. Your technical assessments also show gaps. You scored poorly on the new cloud infrastructure certification exam. You haven't completed any of the continuing education modules for the updated security protocols. Ethan almost laughed. Almost. Those protocols are based on the system architecture I designed. I don't need a certification exam to understand my own work. The three of them exchanged glances. Vanessa's expression shifted from professional detachment to something colder. Mr. Cole, according to our records, you've been employed as a facilities maintenance technician for the past 6 years. You repair cooling systems and perform basic hardware maintenance. You're not listed as a systems architect or engineer in any capacity. Check the old records, Ethan said, before the restructuring, before the acquisition. We did, Gerald replied. Your name appears in some legacy documentation, but frankly, those files are outdated and largely irrelevant to current operations. Whatever work you may have done years ago, your current position is maintenance level, and your performance in that role has been consistently substandard. Vanessa closed her tablet with a definitive click. We're terminating your employment effective immediately. You'll receive 2 weeks severance pay and continuation of health benefits for 60 days. Marcus will handle the exit paperwork. Ethan sat very still. He looked at each of them in turn, These people who'd spent maybe a combined 30 minutes learning who he was before deciding he was disposable. When's the system update scheduled? He asked. Vanessa's eyebrows rose slightly. Excuse me? The massive infrastructure update, the one that's been planned for 3 months. When's it happening? Gerald's jaw tightened. That's not your concern anymore. It's tonight, isn't it? Ethan looked directly at Vanessa. You're running it tonight. Our update schedule is confidential operational information, she said carefully, and yes, no longer your concern. Ethan stood up slowly, reaching for his backpack. The movement made him wince. His back had been hurting for days, another consequence of too many nights sleeping in awkward positions beside server racks. Don't run it, he said. Delay it, at least 2 weeks. Have someone check the integration layers between the new cloud infrastructure and the legacy security framework. Specifically the authentication handshake protocols in sectors 7 through 12. Vanessa's expression went from cold to openly dismissive. Mr. Cole, I appreciate that you're upset, but making vague technical threats isn't going to change this decision. It's not a threat, it's a warning. Ethan shouldered his backpack. The new system doesn't know the old safety protocols exist. When you launch the update, it's going to interpret them as hostile intrusions and try to isolate them. But those protocols are woven into everything. The whole infrastructure will start fighting itself. Gerald actually smirked. Our engineering team has been preparing this update for months. I think they know what they're doing. Do any of them know about the manual override layer? Ethan asked. The one that sits underneath all the automated systems? Silence. That's what I thought, Ethan said. Just delay it. 2 weeks. That's all I'm asking. Vanessa stood as well, signaling the meeting was over. Mr. Cole, I understand you're frustrated, but we have an entire department of highly qualified engineers who vetted this update extensively. Your concerns are noted, but we're moving forward as planned. Then you're making a mistake. That's my decision to make. Her voice carried the absolute certainty of someone who'd never been catastrophically wrong about anything important. Marcus will escort you to collect your personal items. Ethan looked at her for a long moment. He wanted to argue, to explain, to make them understand. But he'd learned years ago that some people couldn't hear you until after everything fell apart. Good luck, he said quietly, and followed Marcus out of the room. The walk through Meridian's facility felt longer than usual. Ethan had spent 6 years moving through these hallways in the dead of night, when the building belonged to him and the machines and whatever ghosts lived in the electrical hum of servers that never slept. During the day, it was different, crowded, bright, full of people who passed him without seeing him, just another maintenance guy in a rumpled shirt with tired eyes. Marcus walked 2 steps ahead, maintaining the professional distance of someone performing an unpleasant duty. They stopped at Ethan's locker in the facilities wing, a narrow corridor that smelled like industrial cleaner and old coffee. Take your time, Marcus said, though his tone suggested the opposite. I'll wait here. Ethan opened the locker. There wasn't much. A spare shirt, a travel mug Sophie had decorated with stickers 3 Christmases ago, a framed photo of her from last year's school picture day, gap-toothed smile and messy braids. He looked at that photo for a few seconds longer than necessary. Got a kid? Marcus asked, his voice softer now that they were away from the conference room. Yeah, Sophie, she's 8. That's a good age. Ethan carefully wrapped the frame in the spare shirt and placed it in his backpack. She's sick a lot, heart condition. That's why I needed the night shift, so I could be there during the day when she needs me. Marcus shifted his weight, uncomfortable with the sudden intimacy of real information. The medical emergencies, that's rough. It's life. Ethan closed the locker. You do what you have to do. They walked toward the exit in silence. At the security desk, Ethan surrendered his access badge to a guard he'd talked to hundreds of times during quiet 3 a.m. rounds. The guard looked confused, started to ask a question, then saw Marcus's expression and stayed quiet. Outside, dawn was just starting to break over the parking lot. Ethan's car, a 10-year-old Honda with a persistent check engine light, sat alone in the far corner. During the day shift, he'd need to park in the overflow lot half a mile away. But at night, he could park wherever he wanted. For what it's worth, Marcus said as they reached the car, I'm sorry about your daughter. Ethan unlocked the door. But not about the firing. I don't make those decisions. No, Ethan agreed. You just implement them. He drove away without looking back, watching Meridian's sleek glass and steel facade shrink in his rearview mirror. The building looked like every other modern tech company headquarters, designed to signal innovation and forward thinking and all those other concepts that looked good in investor presentations. Ethan had helped design the servers that lived beneath all that glass. The real work happened in the basement levels, in rooms kept cold enough to hurt your teeth, where millions of lines of code ran through custom-built infrastructure that connected to defense systems and federal databases and networks that couldn't afford to fail. He'd built it to be nearly indestructible. Nearly. Home was a rental house in a quiet suburban neighborhood, the kind of place where people mowed their lawns on Saturday mornings and complained about property taxes at HOA meetings. Ethan had moved here 4 years ago, after the medical bills made their old apartment impossible to afford. The house itself was fine, small, drafty in winter. The AC barely worked in summer, but it had 2 bedrooms and Sophie's room got good morning light, which seemed important somehow. He pulled into the driveway at 7:23 a.m. Inside, he could hear the television. Cartoons, probably. Sophie was supposed to be getting ready for school. Ethan unlocked the door as quietly as possible and found his daughter sitting at the kitchen table in her pajamas, cereal bowl in front of her, eyes locked on the small TV they kept on the counter. "Hey, Soph." She turned and her whole face lit up in a way that still made his chest tight even after 8 years. "Dad, you're home early." "Yeah, change of plans at work." He set his backpack down and checked the clock. "Why aren't you dressed? School starts in 40 minutes. Mrs. Patterson called. Said I could stay home today if I'm feeling tired." Ethan's attention sharpened. "Are you feeling tired?" Sophie shrugged, a gesture she'd learned meant, "Maybe, but I don't want to worry you." She was 8 years old and already fluent in protecting her father's feelings. He crossed to her and gently placed 2 fingers against her wrist, counting the pulse the way the doctors had taught him. Elevated, but not dangerously so. "Scale of 1 to 10, he said. "How's your chest feel?" "Like a 4, maybe 5. "It's not bad, Dad, just weird." The cardiac monitor on the counter, a machine that cost more than 3 months of rent, showed readings that confirmed what he felt. Not critical, not yet, but worth watching. "Okay," he said. "You stay home today. But we take it easy, no running around. And if it gets worse than a 5, you tell me immediately." "I always do." "I know you do, baby." He kissed the top of her head, breathing in the scent of her strawberry shampoo. "I'm proud of you." Sophie returned her attention to the cartoons, and Ethan moved to the kitchen counter where the mail had piled up. 3 envelopes from the cardiology clinic, 1 from the insurance company, 2 from collections agencies for medical bills that had somehow slipped through the cracks of their payment plan. He opened the insurance letter first. Claim denied. Experimental treatment not covered under current plan. Amount owed, $8,347. Ethan set the letter down very carefully, keeping his breathing steady. Sophie had excellent hearing and a talent for sensing when he was stressed. The severance pay would help. 60 days of health coverage would bridge the gap while he found another job. He'd done this dance before, getting fired for being unreliable when reliability meant choosing between your kid's life and your employer's convenience. His phone buzzed. Text message from an unknown number. "Mr. Cole, this is Adrian Shaw, Security Director at Meridian. I heard about this morning. I wanted to reach out personally. What happened isn't right. If you need a reference or any help finding new work, please let me know." Ethan stared at the message. Adrian was one of the few people at Meridian who'd treated him like a human being instead of a maintenance request. They'd talked sometimes during the quiet hours, swapping stories about their kids, complaining about the incomprehensible decisions that came down from upper management. He typed back, "Thanks. I appreciate that." Another buzz. "Between us? I think Whitmore's making a huge mistake. You know this place better than anyone." Ethan didn't reply to that. There was nothing to say that wouldn't sound like bitterness or self-pity, and he was too tired for either. "Dad?" Sophie had turned to look at him. "Are you okay?" "Yeah, sweetheart. Just tired. It was a long night." "Are you going to sleep?" "In a bit." He managed a smile. "Want to help me make breakfast first? Real breakfast, not just cereal. Her eyes widened. Pancakes? If that's what the lady requests. They moved around the small kitchen together, Sophie retrieving ingredients while Ethan mixed batter. This was their ritual on his nights off, cooking together before he collapsed into whatever sleep he could manage before she needed him again. She chattered about school, about her friend Emma, who had a new puppy, about the art project she was working on. Ethan listened and responded and tried not to think about the system update scheduled to launch in approximately 14 hours. He'd meant what he said in that conference room. The update was going to fail, catastrophically. The question was whether anyone would figure that out before the damage became irreversible. By noon, Ethan had managed 3 hours of broken sleep on the couch, while Sophie watched movies and colored quietly at the kitchen table. The cardiac monitor beeped softly every 30 seconds, a sound that used to terrify him but had become just another piece of their daily soundtrack. He woke to his phone ringing. Unknown number again. Hello? Ethan Cole? A woman's voice, crisp and professional. Speaking. This is Jennifer Marks from Stanton Security Systems. I received your resume last month regarding our infrastructure position. Is this still a good time to talk? Ethan sat up, trying to sound more alert than he felt. Yes, absolutely. Excellent. I've reviewed your qualifications, and I'd like to schedule an interview for next week. Would Tuesday or Thursday work better for you? They talked for 10 minutes about the position, the salary range, the benefits package. It was good work. Better pay than Meridian, actually, and day shifts with reasonable hours. The kind of job that might let him be a father instead of just a survival machine. He scheduled the interview for Tuesday and hung up feeling the first small flicker of hope he'd had in months. Sophie appeared beside the couch. Was that a new job? Maybe. An interview, at least. That's good, right? That's very good. She climbed onto the couch beside him, fitting herself into the space between his arm and his chest the way she'd done since she was tiny. Ethan wrapped his arm around her, feeling her heart beat against his ribs. Too fast. Always too fast, but steady. Dad? Yeah, baby? Are we going to be okay? The question hit him harder than he expected. She was 8. She shouldn't have to ask questions like that. We're going to be fine, he said, and tried to mean it. We always figure it out, right? Right. They sat like that for a while, watching dust motes drift through the afternoon sunlight. Ethan's mind kept drifting back to Meridian, to the update, to all the things that were about to go wrong. He pulled out his phone and typed a message to Adrian Shaw. If anything weird happens tonight with the system update, call me. It doesn't matter what time. The response came quickly. You really think there's going to be a problem? I know there is. Whitmore won't listen. I already tried mentioning your concerns. She thinks you're just bitter about being fired. I know, but when it goes wrong, someone needs to know who can fix it. I'll keep my phone on. Ethan set the phone aside and closed his eyes, letting Sophie's weight ground him in the present moment. Whatever happened at Meridian tonight, it wasn't his problem anymore. They'd made their choice. He'd made his peace with it, or so he told himself. At 6 p.m., Ethan started making dinner while Sophie did homework at the kitchen table. Her math worksheet was covered with eraser marks and small frustrated crosses where she'd gotten problems wrong and started over. This is stupid, she announced. Why do I need to know about fractions? Because fractions are everywhere. When you're splitting a pizza, that's fractions. When you're measuring ingredients for cooking, that's fractions. But we just order pizza. We don't make it. Ethan smiled despite himself. Fair point. But trust me, it's useful. His phone buzzed. Another message from Adrian. Update is launching at 8 p.m. Engineering team seems confident. Whitmore gave a whole speech about innovation and progress. Ethan typed back. How long do you think before the problems start? You're really sure this is going to fail? I'm certain. The question is how fast. He finished cooking. Nothing fancy, just chicken and rice and vegetables Sophie would pick at and complain about. They ate together while the TV played in the background, and Ethan tried to focus on the normal rhythms of their evening instead of the countdown running in his head. 8 p.m. came and went. Ethan gave Sophie her medications, monitored her vitals, and got her ready for bed. She wanted him to read to her, so he settled into the chair beside her bed with a chapter book about a girl who discovered she could talk to animals. Sophie fell asleep halfway through the 3rd chapter, her breathing deep and even. Ethan sat there for a few more minutes, watching her sleep, memorizing the peace in her face. His phone lit up silently in his pocket. 9:47 p.m. Message from Adrian. Okay, we might have a small issue. Some of the security protocols are acting strange, but engineering says it's just normal post-update settling. Ethan typed back, "It's not." Then another message. "How long until it gets worse?" "Depends on how the system responds. Could be an hour, could be 3, but it will get worse." He went to the living room and turned on his laptop, an old machine he'd built himself from spare parts, more powerful than it looked. Out of habit, he pulled up the remote monitoring tools he'd installed years ago, back when he still had proper access to Meridian's systems. Most of his credentials had been deactivated, of course, but some of the older diagnostic ports still recognized his signature. He could see enough to understand what was happening, even if he couldn't fix it remotely. The system update was progressing exactly as planned. Clean installation, smooth integration. All the metrics looked perfect, but underneath, in the deeper layers that the new engineering team didn't know existed, warnings were starting to accumulate. Authentication conflicts, handshake failures, the new system trying to talk to the old framework and getting responses it didn't understand. It was like watching two people have a conversation where one spoke English and the other spoke Mandarin, both absolutely convinced they were communicating clearly. Ethan checked the clock. 10:15 p.m. He should go to bed, get some sleep while Sophie was stable. There was nothing he could do from here anyway. Instead, he made coffee and settled onto the couch, watching the diagnostic data scroll past. 10:47 p.m. First critical error logged. The system attempted to isolate what it perceived as a hostile intrusion, actually just the old security protocols trying to verify the new software. The isolation failed. The protocols pushed back. 11:23 p.m. Cascading failures in the authentication layer, security doors throughout the facility beginning to malfunction. 11:58 p.m. His phone rang. Adrian's voice was tight with controlled panic. "Ethan, we have a situation." "I know. I'm watching the diagnostics." "You can still access our systems?" "Some of them. What's happening on your end?" "Doors are locking and unlocking randomly. We've got people trapped in secure areas. The monitoring systems keep crashing. Engineering is trying to roll back the update, but nothing's responding normally." "It won't. The new system and the old framework are fighting each other. Every fix you try just makes it worse because you're giving conflicting instructions to two different layers of infrastructure." "Can you fix it remotely?" "No. The manual override layer requires physical access. Someone has to be in the building at a specific terminal with the right credentials." Silence on the other end. Then, "Whitmore is asking if you can come in." "I'm sure she is." "Ethan, I told her this would happen. I warned her. She fired me anyway." "I know, but right now you're the only person who can stop this. We've got federal systems connected to our network. If this spreads beyond Meridian, it will. That's how the framework is designed. Isolated failures get contained, but systemic conflicts like this propagate through every connected system until someone manually intervenes." Adrian's voice dropped lower. "People could get hurt. If the wrong security doors lock, if the environmental controls fail in the server rooms. This is bad, Ethan. Really bad." Ethan closed his eyes. He thought about Sophie sleeping in the next room, about the medical bills stacked on the counter, about being fired 8 hours ago by people who thought he was just a janitor who didn't matter. "Is Whitmore there with you?" "Yes." "Put her on." A pause, some muffled conversation. Then Vanessa Whitmore's voice came through the line. She sounded different from this morning, less certain, more afraid. "Mr. Cole, I understand you have concerns about what's happening tonight." "Concerns, that's one way to put it. Our engineering team is working to resolve the issues, but if you have specific insights that could help—" "I don't have insights, Ms. Whitmore. I have the solution. Because I built the system you're breaking. According to our records, your records are wrong. I was the lead architect on the original Meridian infrastructure. I designed the security framework, the authentication protocols, the manual override layer that your new update is now fighting with. I stepped away from that role 6 years ago for personal reasons, but I stayed on as a maintenance tech so I could keep watching the system." He could hear her processing this, recalibrating her understanding of who he was. "If that's true," she said carefully, "then why didn't you say something? Why work as a maintenance worker if you're actually an engineer? Because I needed to be there at night. My daughter is sick. She needs me during the day. The night shift let me do both, be her father and make sure the system I built didn't kill anyone. Mr. Cole, I told you not to run the update. I told you exactly what would happen. You fired me instead of listening, so now you've got a choice. You can keep trying to fix this with people who don't understand what they're working on, or you can ask me to come help. But if you ask, you're going to admit that you were wrong about the update, about me, about all of it. The line went quiet. He could hear other voices in the background, urgent and frightened. Finally, Vanessa spoke. I was wrong. I made assumptions about you that were completely unfair, and I'm sorry. Please, we need your help. Ethan looked toward Sophie's room, where his daughter slept with a heart that didn't work quite right, and medical bills that never stopped coming. He thought about principles and pride, and all the reasons he should tell them to handle it themselves. Then he thought about the people trapped behind malfunctioning security doors, and the federal systems that would start failing soon, and all the ways this disaster could spread beyond Meridian's walls. I need to make arrangements for my daughter, he said. Give me 30 minutes. He hung up and called his neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, a retired nurse who'd helped him more times than he could count. She answered on the second ring. Ethan, it's almost midnight. I know, I'm sorry, but I need a favor. 25 minutes later, Mrs. Patterson was sitting in Ethan's living room with a book and her phone, and Ethan was checking on Sophie one more time before leaving. She was still asleep, her face peaceful in the glow of her nightlight. The cardiac monitor showed steady rhythms. He kissed her forehead gently, careful not to wake her. I love you, baby, he whispered. I'll be back soon. In the living room, Mrs. Patterson looked up from her book. How long do you think you'll be? I honestly don't know. A few hours, maybe. If anything changes with Sophie, anything at all, you call me immediately. I will. Now go. Do whatever needs doing. Ethan grabbed his backpack, still packed from this morning's humiliating exit, and headed out into the night. The drive to Meridian took 18 minutes at this hour. The building looked different after midnight, lit up against the darkness like a ship floating in empty space. Emergency vehicles were parked near the entrance, 3 police cars and an ambulance. Adrian Shaw was waiting at the front entrance. He looked like he'd aged 5 years since this morning. Thank you for coming, he said as Ethan approached. Where's the damage worst? Main server room, and we've got 6 people trapped in secure areas because the door locks won't respond to override commands. Take me to the main control room first. I need to see what they've tried so far. They moved through hallways Ethan knew by heart, past conference rooms and offices that were normally dark at this hour, but were now filled with frightened engineers staring at screens full of error messages. The main control room was chaos. 24 people crowded around monitoring stations, voices overlapping in urgency and confusion. Vanessa Whitmore stood near the center, looking smaller than she had this morning, her certainty replaced by visible fear. She saw Ethan and crossed to him immediately. Mr. Cole, thank you for... Where's the legacy terminal? He interrupted. The one in the southeast corner of the lower server room. I don't know what you're talking about. All our primary terminals are here. There's an older workstation in the basement. That's where the manual override layer is accessed. I need to get there now. I'll take you, Adrian said. They moved quickly through the building, descending 3 levels to the server rooms where the temperature dropped 15 degrees and the sound of cooling fans filled the air like industrial rainfall. The legacy terminal sat exactly where Ethan had left it 6 years ago, covered in dust but still powered on, a single amber light blinking steadily on its front panel. Ethan sat down, his fingers finding the keyboard like a pianist returning to a familiar instrument. The screen flickered to life, displaying a login prompt that none of the current engineers would recognize. Ethan typed his credentials that had never been deactivated because they existed in a layer of the system the new management didn't know about. Access granted. E. Cole, System Architect, Primary Override Authority. Jesus, Adrian breathed behind him. You really did build this. Yeah, Ethan said, his fingers already flying across the keys. I really did. The diagnostic screens showed exactly what he'd expected. 2 systems fighting each other at every integration point, creating cascading failures that would eventually spread to every connected network Meridian touched. He began typing commands, speaking the system's oldest language, telling it to stop fighting and listen. Lines of code scrolled past. Error messages resolved one by one. And somewhere deep in the infrastructure, something responded. Manual override recognized. Awaiting authentication. Handshake. Ethan's hands paused over the keyboard. This was the moment. The choice between holding onto his anger or doing what needed to be done. He thought about Sophie, asleep in her bed with Mrs. Patterson watching over her. He thought about the people trapped behind locked doors, terrified and helpless. He thought about principles and pride and the cost of both. Then he typed the authentication sequence he'd created 7 years ago, when he was a different person building something he hoped would matter. Handshake confirmed. The monitoring board above the terminal began to change. Red indicators shifted to yellow, yellow to green. One by one, sector by sector, the system stopped fighting itself and started listening. In the control room, 3 floors above them, people started crying with relief. Ethan kept typing, manually walking the system through the process of integrating the new update with the old framework, showing it how to understand the languages both sides were speaking. It took 40 minutes. When he finally leaned back from the terminal, his hands were shaking from adrenaline and exhaustion. Adrian was staring at the monitoring board in something like awe. "You did it." "I stabilized it," Ethan corrected, "but the update is still incomplete. Someone needs to finish the integration properly, and it needs to be someone who understands both the new infrastructure and the old framework." "That would be you." "That would be someone you fired 12 hours ago." Adrian had the grace to look ashamed. "I didn't fire you, but I didn't stop it either." Vanessa Whitmore appeared in the doorway, her face pale but composed. "The doors are unlocked. Everyone's safe and the system is stable." "For now," Ethan said. She crossed to him slowly, stopping a few feet away. For a long moment she just looked at him, really looked at him, maybe for the first time. "I owe you an apology," she said quietly. "A real one, not the corporate kind." "Okay. I made assumptions about who you were based on incomplete information and my own arrogance. I dismissed you as underperforming when I should have asked why a brilliant architect was working night shifts as a maintenance tech. I didn't listen when you warned me, and I put lives at risk because of it." Ethan waited. "I'm sorry," she said, "truly sorry, and I hope you'll consider coming back to Meridian in your proper role. Chief Systems Architect. Whatever salary you want, day shifts, full benefits, whatever you need." He thought about the interview on Tuesday, about the medical bills, about Sophie sleeping peacefully while her father tried to keep the world from falling apart. "I'll think about it," he said. Then he stood up, shouldered his backpack, and walked out of the building into the early morning darkness. He had a daughter to get home to. Everything else could wait. The drive home felt longer than it should have. Ethan's hands were still trembling slightly on the steering wheel, the adrenaline from the past 2 hours refusing to fully drain from his system. The dashboard clock read 2:47 a.m. Sophie would be fine with Mrs. Patterson, but he needed to see her with his own eyes, needed to confirm she was breathing steadily and her heart was keeping its fragile rhythm. His phone buzzed in the cup holder. He ignored it. Then it buzzed again. And again. At a red light, he glanced down. 7 missed calls. 12 text messages. All from Meridian numbers. The light turned green. Ethan drove. When he pulled into his driveway at 3:04 a.m., Mrs. Patterson's reading lamp was still visible through the living room window. He found her exactly where he'd left her, though she'd made herself tea and was halfway through what looked like a murder mystery novel. "She okay?" Ethan asked before he'd even closed the door. "Perfect angel. Didn't wake up once." Mrs. Patterson marked her page and stood, gathering her things. "You, on the other hand, look like you've been through a war." "Something like that." "Did you fix whatever needed fixing?" "For now." She studied his face for a moment, the way she sometimes did when she was deciding whether to push for more information or let it go. She chose the latter. "Get some sleep, Ethan. You're no good to that girl if you collapse." After she left, Ethan stood in Sophie's doorway for a full minute, watching the rise and fall of her chest, listening to the soft beep of the cardiac monitor. Everything in this room was exactly as he'd left it. While he'd been preventing a catastrophic system failure that could have cascaded into federal networks, His daughter had slept peacefully, dreaming whatever 8-year-olds dream about. The distance between those two realities felt impossible to reconcile. He walked to the kitchen and pulled out his phone. The messages were mostly from Adrian Shaw, increasingly urgent as the night had progressed. The last one, sent 10 minutes ago, simply read, "Call me when you can. Important." Ethan set the phone face down on the counter and started making coffee he knew he shouldn't drink. It was nearly 3:30 in the morning. He needed sleep. But his brain was still moving at emergency speed, replaying every command he'd typed, every decision he'd made in that cold server room. The coffee was still brewing when his phone rang again. Adrian Shaw. Persistent bastard. "It's 3:30 in the morning," Ethan answered. "I know, I'm sorry, but we have a problem." "Another one?" "The system is stable, but we're finding things. Lots of things. The junior engineers have been digging through the infrastructure trying to understand what you did tonight, and they keep finding layers we didn't know existed. Security protocols we can't access. Authentication frameworks that aren't in any of our documentation. All of it tagged with your initials." Ethan poured coffee into his travel mug, the one with Sophie's fading stickers. "That's not a problem. That's architecture. It is when we don't understand how any of it works. Ethan, you built something that's been running critical systems for 7 years, and nobody here knows how to maintain it. If something else goes wrong, then you call me, like you did tonight. That's not sustainable. We need you here, not as a maintenance tech, as the person in charge of this infrastructure. I already told Whitmore I'd think about it. She's authorized me to offer you whatever you need. Name your salary, pick your hours. We can make this work." Ethan watched steam rise from his coffee, thinking about the Stanton security interview on Tuesday. A normal job. Day shifts. No more sleeping beside server racks or watching systems fail from the inside while everyone else slept. "I need to focus on my daughter right now," he said. "That's the priority." "I understand that, but think about what happened tonight. If you hadn't been available, if you'd been unreachable or unwilling to help, we'd be looking at a disaster that could have affected millions of people. That can't happen again." "Then maybe you should have thought about that before firing me." Adrian was quiet for a moment. "You're right. We screwed up, badly. But we're trying to make it right. I'll call you tomorrow, today, whatever." Ethan rubbed his eyes. "I need a few hours to think." "Fair enough. Just don't take too long. The board is asking questions, and they're not going to like the answers I have to give them." After hanging up, Ethan sat at the kitchen table with his coffee and the stack of medical bills he'd been avoiding. The cardiology clinic wanted $8,000. The insurance company had denied coverage for Sophie's last emergency room visit, another $3,000. The specialty pharmacy that provided her medications was threatening to suspend delivery unless he paid down his outstanding balance, $22,000. That's what keeping his daughter alive currently cost, not counting the regular expenses of rent and food and all the other ordinary things that felt impossible to afford. The job offer from Meridian would solve that. Chief systems architect probably came with a salary in the low 6 figures, maybe higher if he pushed for it. Health insurance that actually covered Sophie's treatments. Stability. But it also meant going back to the place that had fired him less than 24 hours ago. Working for people who'd looked at him and seen nothing worth keeping. Rebuilding trust with a CEO who'd dismissed his warnings until disaster proved him right. His phone buzzed again. This time it was a text from a number he didn't recognize. "Mr. Cole, this is Marcus Chen from HR. I wanted to personally apologize for my role in yesterday's termination. I should have looked deeper into your employment history before proceeding with the paperwork. If you decide to return to Meridian, I'll make sure the process is handled properly." Ethan stared at the message for a long time before deleting it without responding. The coffee was almost gone when he heard Sophie's door open. Small footsteps padded down the hallway, and then she appeared in the kitchen doorway, clutching the stuffed rabbit she'd had since she was 3. "Dad, why are you awake?" "Had to go into work for a bit. Just got home." She climbed into his lap without asking, fitting herself against his chest the way she always did when she was worried. "Your heart's beating really fast." "Is it?" "Mm-hmm. Like mine does sometimes." He wrapped his arms around her, breathing in the smell of her hair. "I'm okay, baby. Just tired." "Did something bad happen at work?" "Something complicated. But I fixed it." Sophie was quiet for a moment, her fingers tracing patterns on his arm. Are you still fired? The question shouldn't have surprised him. Sophie was observant in ways that constantly caught him off guard. She noticed when bills piled up, when he was stressed, when things changed in their careful routine. Maybe not, he said. They asked me to come back. Are you going to? I don't know yet. What do you think I should do? She considered this seriously, her 8-year-old face scrunched in concentration. I think you should do whatever makes you less tired. You're always so tired, Dad. Something in his chest cracked a little. I'm okay, Soph. You're not, though. You fall asleep on the couch every day. And sometimes when you think I'm not looking, you just sit and stare at nothing like you forgot how to move. Ethan closed his eyes. I'm sorry. Don't be sorry. I just want you to be happy, or at least not so sad all the time. They sat like that until Sophie started yawning, and Ethan carried her back to bed. She was getting too big for this, really, long-limbed and growing every day, but he held her carefully anyway, memorizing the weight of her in his arms. Dad? She mumbled as he tucked her in. Yeah? If you go back to work there, can you still be home during the day? That's part of what I need to figure out. Okay, but don't forget about me. The words hit harder than she meant them to. Never. You're the most important thing in the world to me. Everything else is just details. She smiled sleepily and closed her eyes. Within minutes, her breathing deepened into the steady rhythm of sleep. Ethan stood in her doorway again, watching her, until his phone buzzed one more time. Vanessa Whitmore. A text message sent at 4:17 a.m. I can't sleep knowing how badly I misjudged you. I'm not texting to pressure you about the job offer. I just wanted you to know that I spent the last 2 hours reading through your original design documentation for our infrastructure. It's brilliant, and I'm sorry I didn't bother to learn who you really were before deciding you were expendable. Ethan read it twice, then set the phone down without responding. He managed 3 hours of sleep before Sophie's alarm went off at 7:30. She was feeling better today, a good sign, and wanted to go to school. Ethan made breakfast while she got dressed, moving through their morning routine on autopilot. At 8:15, he dropped her off at Riverside Elementary, watching until she disappeared through the front doors with her friend Emma. Then he drove home and stared at his phone for 20 minutes before finally calling Adrian Shaw. I need conditions, Ethan said when Adrian answered. Name them. Day shifts only, 9 to 5, hard stop. No on-call rotations, no emergency weekend work. If something breaks outside those hours, you figure it out or you wait until I'm back. That's going to be difficult to... I'm not negotiating. Those are the terms. My daughter comes first, always. If that doesn't work for you, I'll take the interview I have scheduled at Stanton Security on Tuesday. Adrian was quiet for a moment. What else? Full health coverage, not the standard plan. I need the executive tier that covers experimental treatments and doesn't have coverage caps. Done. What else? I want complete authority over the infrastructure. I don't take orders from engineering or operations. They can make requests, but final decisions on anything touching the core system go through me. If that's a problem, we're done talking. Whitmore already authorized that. You'd report directly to her and you'd have veto power over any major system changes. Ethan hadn't expected that. What's the salary? She said to offer you $220 base plus performance bonuses and stock options. Is that acceptable? $220,000. More than triple what he'd been making as a maintenance tech. Enough to pay off Sophie's medical debt and still have money left over for things like decent groceries and maybe fixing the AC before summer hit. When do you need an answer? Honestly, today. The board is meeting this afternoon, and they're not happy about last night. Whitmore needs to show them we have a plan to prevent this from happening again, and that plan is you. I'll call you back in 2 hours. Ethan spent those 2 hours doing something he almost never allowed himself to do, thinking about what he actually wanted instead of just what he could survive. He wanted Sophie to be healthy. That was non-negotiable and outside his control. He wanted to sleep in a real bed instead of passing out on the couch while monitoring her vitals. He wanted to use his brain for something other than just keeping broken systems limping along. He wanted to feel like the work he did mattered, that the years he'd spent building something important hadn't been completely wasted. But he also wanted people to see him, really see him, not as a maintenance tech or a desperate father or a brilliant engineer, but as all of those things at once.
complicated and imperfect and worthy of basic respect. The question was whether Meridian could give him that after everything that had happened. At 11:45, he called Adrian back.
I'll take the job, but I'm starting Monday, not today. I need the weekend with my daughter. That works. I'll have HR draw up the paperwork. And Adrian? If anyone treats me like I'm just some janitor, they're doing a favor by hiring, I walk. I don't care how much you're paying me. Respect isn't negotiable. Understood. For what it's worth, after last night, I think respect is the one thing you won't have to worry about. The weekend passed in a strange bubble of normalcy. Ethan took Sophie to the park on Saturday, watching her play on the swings and carefully monitoring how tired she got. They went grocery shopping and bought things he normally considered too expensive: fresh strawberries, good cheese, the name brand cereal Sophie liked. On Sunday, they stayed home and watched movies, and Ethan tried not to think about Monday morning. But Sunday night, after Sophie was asleep, he pulled out his old laptop and started reviewing the infrastructure documentation he'd written 7 years ago. It was strange, reading his own words from that earlier version of himself, someone who'd been optimistic about the future, who'd believed the systems he built would be maintained and improved by people who cared about doing things right. That younger Ethan hadn't known his wife would die 3 months after he finished the initial build, hadn't known he'd lose himself in grief so completely that he'd walk away from everything he'd created, hadn't known he'd spend the next 6 years in a kind of voluntary exile, watching his masterpiece from the shadows, while pretending to be someone much smaller than he was. The documentation was good, though, detailed and clear, written for people who might need to understand the system without him there to explain it. He'd been thorough because he'd been proud of the work. Before loss had taught him that pride was dangerous, that caring about anything too much was just setting yourself up for devastation. Monday morning arrived with rain that matched Ethan's mood, gray and uncertain and impossible to avoid. He dropped Sophie at school at the usual time, then drove to Meridian in business casual clothes that felt strange after years of maintenance uniforms. Adrian met him at the entrance with a new security badge and a visitor's smile. Welcome back. We'll see how long that lasts. The building felt different during day shift hours. Crowded, loud, full of people who looked at him with open curiosity as Adrian led him through the hallways toward the executive floor. Some of them probably recognized him from his night shift days. Most probably had no idea who he was. Vanessa Whitmore's office was on the top floor, with windows that overlooked the city and furniture that cost more than Ethan's car. She stood when he entered, coming around her desk to shake his hand. Mr. Cole, thank you for giving us another chance. I'm here for the work, not the apologies. She didn't flinch. Fair enough. Let me show you your office. The space she took him to was 3 doors down from hers. A corner office with actual windows and a door that closed, and a desk that looked like it had never been used for anything as undignified as actual work. There was a new computer, top-of-the-line monitors, and a small whiteboard already covered with marker scribbles from whoever had been using this space before. This is mine? Ethan asked. As of this morning, you can decorate however you want. Or not. Whatever works for you. Vanessa paused in the doorway. The engineering team is waiting in conference room A. They're eager to meet with you and get briefed on the infrastructure. I thought you might want to start there. Give me 10 minutes to settle in first. Of course. After she left, Ethan stood in the middle of the office and tried to figure out if this was real or some elaborate stress dream. 4 days ago, he'd been fired in conference room B. Now he had an office with windows and a salary that would change his daughter's life. The dissonance was almost physically painful. He unpacked his canvas backpack, setting up the framed photo of Sophie on his new desk. Then he pulled out a worn notebook where he'd been sketching infrastructure improvements for years, ideas he'd never had the authority to implement when he was just a maintenance tech. The engineering team was waiting when he walked into conference room A 15 minutes later. 23 people, mostly young, all watching him with expressions that ranged from curious to skeptical to openly hostile. Ethan recognized a few faces from Friday night's disaster. Others were completely new. He took a seat at the head of the conference table and waited until everyone settled into uncomfortable silence. I'm Ethan Cole, he began. I designed the core infrastructure you've been working on for the past 7 years. I know some of you think I'm here because I got lucky Friday night, or because management is being sentimental about the old days, or because I've got some kind of nepotism connection that got me this position. I don't particularly care what you think. What I care about is making sure what happened Friday never happens again. A woman near the back raised her hand. I'm Jennifer Park, Senior Cloud Engineer. If you designed this infrastructure, why isn't your name in any of the current documentation? Because the documentation you're using was rewritten during the acquisition 5 years ago. Whoever did that update decided to streamline things, which apparently meant removing historical attribution. The original docs still exist in the archive servers, if you want to verify. A younger guy with expensive glasses leaned forward. Kyle Chen, security team. I looked at the code you wrote Friday night. Some of those commands aren't in any programming language I recognize. That's because they're not a programming language. They're direct assembly instructions for the custom chipsets I had fabricated for the original server build. The manual override layer runs on dedicated hardware that predates everything you've been working with. Kyle blinked. You built custom chips? I built a lot of things. That's why I'm here. To document all of it properly so we don't end up in another crisis when I'm not available to fix it. Jennifer raised her hand again. Why did you leave in the first place? If you built something this important, why walk away? The room got quieter. Ethan could feel them watching him, evaluating whether he'd give them a real answer or corporate deflection. My wife died, he said simply. 6 years ago. Cancer. She was sick for 8 months, and when she died, I couldn't think straight enough to do this kind of work anymore. So I stepped away and took a job that didn't require me to be brilliant or creative or anything except present. Maintenance work let me process my grief and raise our daughter without having to make decisions that could affect millions of people. The hostility in the room shifted slightly. Not gone, but muted. I'm sorry for your loss, Jennifer said quietly. Thank you. But we're not here to talk about my personal history. We're here to make sure you understand the system well enough to maintain it without me having to save the day every time something breaks. He stood and moved to the whiteboard, picking up a marker. Let's start with the basic architecture. What you think of as Meridian's infrastructure is actually 3 separate systems that communicate through carefully controlled interfaces. For the next 4 hours, Ethan walked them through everything. The hidden override layers, the authentication frameworks that existed in parallel with the standard security protocols, the fail-safes he'd built in case someone tried to do exactly what they'd done Friday night. Some of them took notes frantically. Others just stared like he was speaking a foreign language they'd only recently started learning. A few, Kyle Chen and Jennifer Park among them, asked intelligent questions that showed they were actually understanding the implications of what he was explaining. By the time Vanessa knocked on the conference room door at 3:30, Ethan's throat was raw from talking and his hand ached from drawing diagrams. How's it going? She asked. We're making progress, Ethan said. But this is going to take weeks, not days, maybe months. That's fine. We've cleared your calendar for as long as you need. She glanced at the exhausted engineers. Why don't we break for today? You can continue tomorrow. The team filed out slowly, some of them stopping to ask Ethan follow-up questions on their way past. Jennifer Park was the last to leave. Mr. Cole? She hesitated in the doorway. I was one of the people who recommended your termination last week. I wrote in my report that the maintenance staff was overstaffed and underutilized. I didn't know anything about you, and I didn't bother to find out. I'm sorry. Ethan looked at her for a long moment. You were doing your job based on the information you had. I don't hold that against you, but maybe next time ask more questions before deciding someone is disposable. I will. I promise. After she left, Vanessa closed the conference room door and sat down across from Ethan. You handled that well, she said. Did I have a choice? You could have been angry, made them feel small for not knowing. Used this as an opportunity to punish people who contributed to your termination. What would that accomplish? Vanessa smiled slightly. Nothing, but you'd be entitled to it. Ethan started erasing the whiteboard, wiping away hours of technical diagrams. I spent 6 years being invisible. Being angry now won't change that. It'll just waste energy I need for actual work. Is that really how you feel, or is that what you're telling yourself to get through the day? He paused mid-wipe, surprised by the directness of the question. Does it matter? Does it? Probably not. But I'm trying to understand you better. I misjudged you catastrophically, and I'd like to avoid doing that again. Then here's what you need to understand. I don't care about office politics or corporate hierarchy or proving I'm the smartest person in the room. I care about building things that work and raising my daughter and having enough money to pay for her medical care. Everything else is noise. That's fair. Vanessa stood, gathering her tablet. For what it's worth, I'm glad you came back. Not because it solves my problems, though it does, but because you deserve better than what we gave you before. After she left, Ethan finished cleaning the whiteboard and packed up his things. It was 4:15. He'd promised himself he'd leave by 5, and he intended to keep that promise. His phone rang as he was walking to his new office. Mrs. Patterson. Ethan, Sophie's school just called. She's in the nurse's office. They said she's okay, but her chest hurts and they think you should come get her. The world contracted to a single point of focus. I'm leaving now. Tell them I'll be there in 20 minutes. He grabbed his backpack and ran. The drive to Riverside Elementary took 16 minutes in afternoon traffic. Ethan made it in 11, his knuckles white on the steering wheel, every red light feeling like a personal attack. His phone sat in the cup holder, silent but threatening, waiting to ring again with worse news. Sophie's heart. Always her heart. The thing he couldn't fix, no matter how many systems he understood or how many brilliant solutions he could code into existence. Her heart was the one problem that rendered all his expertise completely useless. He parked illegally in the fire lane and ran through the front entrance without signing in at the office. The nurse's suite was down the main hallway, past colorful bulletin boards covered in student artwork and motivational posters about kindness and perseverance. Sophie was sitting on the vinyl examination bench when he burst through the door, her legs dangling, not quite reaching the floor. She looked small and pale, but she was conscious and breathing, and her eyes lit up when she saw him. Dad! Hey, baby! He crossed to her immediately, his hands already finding her wrist to check her pulse. Fast. Too fast. What happened? We were playing kickball at recess, and I just got really tired really fast, and then my chest started feeling weird. The school nurse, a woman named Linda, who dealt with Sophie's episodes before, handed Ethan a printout from the portable cardiac monitor they kept specifically for his daughter. Heart rate spiked to 187 during physical activity, then stayed elevated even after she rested. I gave her water and kept her quiet, but I thought you should come get her. Ethan studied the printout, his brain automatically translating the data into implications and risks. Tachycardia. Not immediately dangerous, but not normal either. Could be nothing. Could be the precursor to something worse. Did you take your medication this morning? He asked Sophie. Yeah, the blue one and the white one, just like always. Okay, good. He helped her down from the bench, noting how she moved carefully, protecting her chest. We're going to go see Dr. Morrison, all right? Just to make sure everything's okay. Sophie's face fell. But I hate Dr. Morrison's office. It smells weird and the chairs are uncomfortable. I know, but we need to check. Can we get ice cream after? If Dr. Morrison says it's okay, yes. The nurse walked them to the door, her hand briefly touching Ethan's arm. She's going to be fine. Kids with her condition have these episodes sometimes. It doesn't always mean something's wrong. I know, Ethan said, though knowing didn't make the fear any smaller. The pediatric cardiology clinic was on the other side of the city, a 40-minute drive that Ethan had made so many times he could navigate it in his sleep. Sophie sat in the back seat, quiet now, watching the world pass by her window. She had her stuffed rabbit with her. The nurse must have retrieved it from her backpack, and she held it tight against her chest. Dad? Yeah, Soph? Are you going to lose your new job because of this? The question hit him sideways. What? No, why would you think that? Because that's what happened last time, and the time before. You leave work to come get me, and then they get mad and you get in trouble. Ethan glanced at her in the rearview mirror, seeing the worry etched across her 8-year-old face. That's not going to happen, I promise. But what if... Sophie, listen to me. The job doesn't matter. You matter. If I had to choose between any job in the world and taking care of you, I'd choose you every single time. Understand? She nodded, but he could see she didn't quite believe him. She'd learned too young that everything had a cost, that her health problems created consequences that rippled out into their lives in ways neither of them could fully control. His phone rang. Vanessa Whitmore. Ethan almost didn't answer, then realized that would just confirm Sophie's fears. Ethan? Adrian said you left in a hurry. Is everything all right? My daughter's having a cardiac episode. I'm taking her to her cardiologist now. Oh, of course. Take whatever time you need. Do you need anything? The question surprised him. No, we're fine. I'll be back in the office tomorrow. Don't worry about tomorrow. Worry about your daughter. The infrastructure briefings can wait. After he hung up, Sophie asked, Was that your boss? Yeah. She didn't sound mad. She wasn't. I told you, Soph. This job is different. He hoped he was right. Dr. Morrison's office did smell weird. A combination of antiseptic and the peculiar scent of medical equipment that never quite got clean. The waiting room was decorated in an aggressively cheerful style that probably made sense to whoever designed it, but just felt jarring to Ethan. Bright primary colors, cartoon animals painted on the walls, toys that had been touched by too many anxious children. Sophie had brought a book with her, some fantasy story about dragons and friendship that she'd read at least 4 times already. She curled up in one of the uncomfortable chairs the nurse had warned them about and pretended to read while stealing glances at the other kids in the waiting room. A toddler with a port in his chest. A teenage girl who looked exhausted in a way that had nothing to do with lack of sleep. A boy around Sophie's age whose mother kept checking his oxygen levels on a portable monitor. This was the world they lived in, the one where children had heart conditions and parents learned medical terminology they never wanted to know. Sophie Cole? The nurse who called them back was new, someone Ethan didn't recognize. She took Sophie's vitals in the exam room with practiced efficiency: blood pressure, temperature, oxygen saturation, weight. Everything went into a tablet that would feed data into Dr. Morrison's system before she even walked through the door. The doctor will be with you shortly, the nurse said, and left them alone in the small room. Sophie climbed onto the exam table, her legs dangling again. Do you think she's going to say I need surgery? I don't know, baby. Let's wait and see what she says. Emma's mom said that kids with heart problems sometimes need surgery to fix them. Do you think that's true? Ethan sat in the plastic chair next to the exam table, suddenly exhausted. Sometimes, yeah. But you've had surgery before, remember? When you were 5, and you were so brave. I don't remember being brave. I just remember being scared and then waking up and everything hurt. That's what brave looks like sometimes. Being scared and doing it anyway. Dr. Morrison arrived 10 minutes later with Sophie's chart already pulled up on her tablet. She was in her late 50s with gray hair she kept in a practical bun, and the kind of calm competence that came from 30 years of dealing with frightened children and their terrified parents. Sophie, Ethan, good to see you both, though I wish it was under better circumstances. She pulled up a stool and sat at eye level with Sophie. I hear you had an exciting afternoon. I guess. My heart did the fast thing again. The fast thing. I like that description. Dr. Morrison started her examination, listening to Sophie's chest with a stethoscope while asking casual questions about school and friends and what she'd been reading lately. It was a technique Ethan had watched her use dozens of times, distract the patient while gathering data. After a few minutes, she turned to her tablet and pulled up the monitor readout the school had sent over. Her expression didn't change, but Ethan had learned to read the small signs, the slight tightening around her eyes, the way she tapped her stylus twice against the screen before speaking. Okay, Dr. Morrison said, here's what I'm seeing. The tachycardia episode at school was significant, but it resolved on its own, which is good. However, I'm noticing a pattern in her data over the past few weeks that concerns me slightly. What kind of pattern? Ethan asked. Increasing frequency of elevated heart rates during normal activity. Not enough to be immediately dangerous, but enough that I think we should do some additional testing. I'd like to schedule an echocardiogram and possibly a stress test to get a clearer picture of what's happening. Sophie's hand found Ethan's. Does that mean something's really wrong? It means we're being careful, Dr. Morrison said gently. Your heart is working harder than it should be, and I want to understand why. It might be something we can manage with medication adjustments. It might be nothing at all. But we won't know until we look. When? Ethan asked. I can get you in this Thursday, early morning, before school. The tests take about 2 hours, and then we'll have preliminary results the same day. Thursday. That gave him 3 days to hold it together and pretend everything was fine, while his daughter walked around with a heart that might be failing in ways they didn't understand yet. Okay, he said. Thursday works. Dr. Morrison printed out instructions and updated Sophie's medication schedule, adjusting dosages slightly to see if that helped with the elevated heart rates. Then she did something Ethan hadn't expected. She pulled out a lollipop from her coat pocket and handed it to Sophie. For being such a good patient, and because Mondays are rough enough without also having to visit boring doctors. Sophie actually smiled. Thanks. In the car afterwards, Sophie was quiet for the first 10 minutes. Then she said, Dad, if my heart gets worse, what happens? Ethan gripped the steering wheel tighter. We deal with it. Whatever it is, we figure it out together. But what if you can't fix it? Then we find people who can. That's what Dr. Morrison is for. That's what all these doctors and specialists are for. You've got a whole team of people making sure you're okay. But what if... Sophie. He caught her eyes in the rearview mirror. I know you're scared. I'm scared too. But we can't live in the what-ifs. We just take it one day at a time, one test at a time. Can you do that with me? She nodded slowly. One day at a time. That's my girl. They stopped for ice cream on the way home, even though it was almost dinner time and completely violated every responsible parenting rule Ethan usually followed. But Sophie had been through enough today, and sometimes being a good father meant buying your kid ice cream when the world felt too heavy. She got chocolate chip. He got coffee. They sat in the parking lot of the ice cream shop, eating in comfortable silence while the sun started its descent toward the horizon. Your new job, Sophie said eventually, her spoon scraping the bottom of her cup. Do you like it? It's complicated. I like the work. I'm not sure yet about the people. Because they fired you before? Yeah, and because it's hard to trust people after they treat you like you don't matter. Sophie considered this seriously. Emma's mom says you should always give people second chances. But Emma says her mom is wrong about a lot of things. Ethan laughed despite himself. What do you think? I think people mess up sometimes. But if they're really sorry and they try to do better, maybe that's worth something. When did you get so wise? I've always been wise. You just don't notice because you're busy being stressed. They finished their ice cream and drove home through the evening traffic. The house was exactly as they'd left it that morning. Dishes still in the sink from breakfast, Sophie's homework spread across the kitchen table, the cardiac monitor humming its perpetual background note. Ethan helped Sophie with her homework while simultaneously checking work emails on his phone. The engineering team had follow-up questions from today's briefing. Adrian wanted to schedule a meeting about long-term infrastructure planning. Vanessa had sent a message that just said, Hope Sophie is okay. Take care of yourself. He responded to the urgent messages and ignored the rest. Sophie's math homework required more focus than he could spare, and eventually he had to admit he didn't actually remember how to do long division the way they were teaching it now. That's okay, Sophie said generously. You're good at other math, just not the easy kind. At 8:30, after dinner and medications and the usual bedtime routine, Ethan tucked Sophie into bed and read her another chapter from the Dragon Book. She was asleep before he finished, her breathing steady and even, the cardiac monitor showing rhythms that looked normal enough to let him breathe easier. He stood in her doorway for a while, watching her sleep, before finally retreating to the living room with his laptop. There was work to do, documentation to write, system diagrams to update, emails to send. But his brain felt sluggish, still caught in the fear from this afternoon. His phone buzzed. Adrian Shaw, calling instead of texting. It's late, Ethan answered. I know, sorry, but we've got another situation. Ethan's stomach dropped. What kind of situation? Not an emergency. But we're getting reports from some of the federal agencies that connect to our network. They're seeing performance issues, slow response times, authentication delays. Nothing catastrophic, but enough that they're asking questions. That's residual instability from Friday's update. The integration I did was a patch, not a permanent solution. I told you it would take time to properly merge the new system with the old framework. I know. But the agencies don't care about our internal problems. They need guarantees that our infrastructure is stable. Ethan rubbed his eyes, feeling the exhaustion settle deeper into his bones. I can write up a technical report explaining the current state and the timeline for full resolution, but Adrian, I can't be on call every night. I told you that was part of the deal. I'm not asking you to be on call. I'm asking if you can come in early tomorrow and brief me on what I should tell these agencies. An hour? Maybe 2. Then you're free for the rest of the day. How early? 7 a.m.? Sophie's appointment on Thursday was at 7:30. That meant he needed to pick her up from Mrs. Patterson's house by 7.
which meant he needed to drop her off before 6:30, which meant they both needed to be awake by 6.
I can do 7, Ethan said, but only tomorrow. This can't be a regular thing. Understood. And Ethan, I heard about Sophie. Is she okay? We don't know yet. More tests on Thursday. If you need anything, time off, different hours, whatever, just say the word. After hanging up, Ethan sat in the quiet living room and let himself feel everything he'd been holding back all day. The fear, the exhaustion, the impossible weight of being the only person who could hold everything together. He thought about the version of himself from 7 years ago, the one who'd designed Meridian's infrastructure with such confidence and pride. That Ethan had believed problems were solvable if you were smart enough and worked hard enough. That Ethan hadn't yet learned that some problems didn't have solutions, just management strategies and coping mechanisms and desperate improvisation. His wife's death had taught him that. Sophie's illness reinforced it daily. But somewhere in the rubble of those hard lessons, he'd also learned something that younger version of himself had never understood. Sometimes keeping things from falling apart completely was its own kind of victory. Sometimes just surviving until tomorrow was enough. He worked until midnight, documenting the infrastructure integration issues and writing the report Adrian needed. Then he checked on Sophie one more time, still sleeping peacefully, before finally allowing himself to collapse into bed. The alarm went off at 5:30 a.m. Ethan dragged himself through a shower and coffee, then woke Sophie at 6. "Why are we up so early?" she mumbled, her eyes still closed. "I have to go to work early today. Mrs. Patterson is going to get you ready for school." "Can't I just stay home?" "You're feeling okay, right? Your chest doesn't hurt?" "No, I'm just tired." "I know, baby. Me too. But you need to go to school, and I need to go to work. That's how it works." He got her dressed and fed while she complained about the fundamental unfairness of early mornings. By 6:20, they were in the car, driving through the gray pre-dawn streets to Mrs. Patterson's house. "You'll pick me up from school at the normal time?" Sophie asked as he walked her to Mrs. Patterson's door. "I'll be there. I promise." "Okay. Love you, Dad." "Love you too, baby." Mrs. Patterson answered the door in her bathrobe, looking amused. "You two have the worst schedule I've ever seen." "Tell me about it." Ethan handed over Sophie's backpack. "Her medications are in the side pocket. She needs to take the white pill with breakfast." "I know the routine, Ethan. Go. Do whatever crisis management you're needed for." The drive to Meridian took 25 minutes in early morning traffic. Ethan arrived at 6:55 with a travel mug of coffee that was already half empty and a growing headache behind his eyes. Adrian was waiting in the executive conference room with 2 people Ethan didn't recognize. One was a woman in her 40s with the kind of severe haircut that suggested military background. The other was a younger man in an expensive suit, holding a tablet like it was a security blanket. "Ethan Cole, this is Director Sarah Vance from the Defense Intelligence Agency and Thomas Webb from Homeland Security. They're here about the performance issues." Director Vance stood to shake his hand. Her grip was firm enough to hurt. "Mr. Cole, we've heard interesting things about you." "I'm sure you have. Your infrastructure supports some very sensitive networks. When we see performance degradation, we need immediate answers about cause and resolution." Ethan sat down, set his coffee aside, and pulled out his laptop. "The cause is an incomplete system integration following a major update that was launched without proper testing. The resolution is in progress and will take approximately 3 to 4 weeks to complete fully." Thomas Webb looked up from his tablet. "That's not acceptable. Our systems can't operate with degraded performance for a month." "Then you should have thought about that before authorizing a massive update to infrastructure you don't fully understand." Director Vance's eyebrows rose. "Excuse me? I built this system 7 years ago with specific integration protocols designed to prevent exactly what happened Friday night. Those protocols were ignored during the update because the current engineering team didn't know they existed. Now we're dealing with the consequences. I can fix it properly and permanently, but that takes time. Or I can rush a solution that might work temporarily but will create bigger problems later. Your choice." The room went very quiet. Adrian shifted in his seat. "What Ethan means is, I mean exactly what I said." Ethan looked directly at Director Vance. "You want honesty or you want corporate deflection? Because I don't have the energy for deflection right now." Something that might have been respect flickered across Vance's face. "Honesty. Always." "Then here's the honest truth. Your networks are running on infrastructure that's been maintained by people who didn't understand what they were maintaining. I'm fixing that now, but it requires rebuilding trust between two different system architectures that are currently fighting each other. I can give you incremental improvements each week, and I can guarantee that nothing will catastrophically fail during the repair process. But I can't magically make this go faster just because you're impatient. Thomas Webb looked like he wanted to argue. Director Vance held up a hand to stop him. 3 weeks? She asked. 4, conservatively. Maybe 3 if everything goes smoothly. And you're confident the systems won't fail during that time? I built in redundancies specifically for situations like this. As long as nobody tries to implement any more brilliant updates without consulting me first, you'll be fine. Vance actually smiled. I like you, Mr. Cole. You remind me of the engineers I worked with in the military, more interested in solving problems than managing egos. I'm really just interested in going home to my daughter at the end of the day. Fair enough. She stood, signaling the meeting was over. You have your 4 weeks, but I want weekly progress reports. You'll get them. After they left, Adrian let out a long breath. That was either brilliant or career suicide. I'm not sure which. Does it matter? To me? No. To Whitmore? We'll find out. Ethan checked his phone. 7:45. He'd promised Sophie he'd pick her up at 3:30. That gave him almost 8 hours to get actual work done before he had to leave. I need to brief the engineering team on the repair timeline, he said. Can you set up a meeting for this afternoon? Already scheduled for 2 p.m. Whitmore wants to sit in, if that's okay. It's her company. She can sit wherever she wants. The rest of the morning disappeared into technical work. Ethan locked himself in his office and started the detailed process of mapping every integration point between the old and new systems. It was tedious, meticulous work that required the kind of focus he'd struggled to maintain for years. But it felt good to use his brain this way again, to solve problems that actually had solutions. Jennifer Park stopped by around 11 with questions about the authentication protocols. They spent 40 minutes working through the technical details, and Ethan found himself actually enjoying the conversation. She was sharp, asked good questions, didn't pretend to understand things she didn't. Can I ask you something? Jennifer said as she was leaving. Sure. Why did you stay? After your wife died, after you stepped back from engineering, why stay at Meridian at all? You could have gone anywhere. Ethan leaned back in his chair, considering how much truth to share. Because I built something important here, and I didn't trust anyone else to take care of it. And because the night shift let me be there for my daughter when she needed me. Those 2 things mattered more than career advancement or recognition or any of the other reasons people usually make job decisions. That makes sense. Jennifer hesitated in the doorway. For what it's worth, I'm glad you came back. We need people who actually care about the work instead of just collecting paychecks. After she left, Ethan sat quietly for a moment, surprised by how much the comment meant to him. Lunch was a sandwich from the cafeteria, eaten at his desk while reviewing system logs. The afternoon meeting started at 2 p.m. sharp, with 15 engineers and Vanessa Whitmore all crammed into conference room A. Ethan walked them through the repair timeline, breaking down the work into weekly phases with clear deliverables and success metrics. Some of it would require overnight maintenance windows. Some would happen during normal business hours. All of it required careful coordination and constant monitoring. Questions? He asked when he finished. Kyle Chen raised his hand. What happens if we run into problems we can't solve? Do we call you at home? No. You document the problem thoroughly, and we address it during normal business hours. The only exception is if something is actively failing in a way that affects the federal networks. Then, and only then, you call me. But what if... Kyle, I have an 8-year-old daughter with a serious heart condition. I need to be available for her, which means I can't be on call 24/7 for work. This repair process is designed to be stable enough that it won't require constant emergency intervention. Trust the architecture, Vanessa spoke up from the back of the room. And if there is an emergency that requires Ethan's involvement outside work hours, it goes through me first. I'll evaluate whether it's actually critical or if it can wait until morning. Several people looked surprised by this. Ethan was surprised too. After the meeting, Vanessa caught up with him in the hallway. How's Sophie? Scared. We have more tests on Thursday. What time? 7:30 a.m. Take the whole day. I'll clear your calendar. I don't need... Ethan. Her voice was firm but not unkind. Take the day. Spend it with your daughter. The infrastructure will still be here on Friday. He looked at her carefully, searching for the ulterior motive, the corporate calculation behind the kindness. But all he saw was genuine concern. Thank you, he said finally. You're welcome. And Ethan? What you said in the meeting about trust. I'm working on earning that from you. I know it'll take time, but I want you to know I'm trying. At 3:15, Ethan packed up his laptop and headed for the parking lot. Traffic was light, and he made it to Riverside Elementary with 10 minutes to spare. Sophie came out with Emma, both of them giggling about something that happened at lunch. When she saw Ethan waiting by the car, her whole face brightened. Dad, you're early! I promised I'd be here, didn't I? She hugged him tight, and he held her close, breathing in the smell of school and playground and the strawberry shampoo she'd used that morning. How was your day? He asked as they drove home. Good. We learned about fractions again, which is still stupid. And in art, we made clay sculptures. Mine's a dragon. Of course it is. Emma made a unicorn, but it kind of looks like a horse with a pencil stuck to its head. That's most unicorns, honestly. Sophie laughed, and the sound filled the car with something that felt dangerously close to hope. Maybe things would be okay. Maybe the tests on Thursday would show nothing serious. Maybe this new job would actually work out. Maybe he could have both things. A career that mattered, and a daughter who knew she came first. Maybe. The rest of the week passed in a blur of engineering work and parental worry. Wednesday night, Ethan barely slept, his mind running through every possible outcome of Thursday's tests. By the time his alarm went off at 6 a.m., he felt like he'd been awake for days. Sophie was quiet during breakfast, picking at her cereal without actually eating much. They drove to Dr. Morrison's office through the early morning streets, and Ethan held her hand in the waiting room while they filled out paperwork he'd filled out 100 times before. The tests themselves took 3 hours. Ethan sat in the waiting room with outdated magazines he didn't read, watching other parents deal with their own fears and exhaustion. A woman about his age with a toddler who kept pulling at his oxygen tube. An older couple holding hands while they waited for news about their grandson. This was the club nobody wanted to join. The parents of sick children. The ones who learned medical terminology and advocated fiercely and stayed awake at night counting heartbeats. At 11:30, Dr. Morrison called him into her office. Sophie was with a nurse getting dressed after the procedures. The doctor's face was carefully neutral. The expression Ethan had learned meant complicated news. How bad? He asked before she could speak. Sit down, Ethan. He sat. Dr. Morrison pulled up images on her computer, echocardiogram results that looked like abstract art to anyone who didn't know how to read them. To Ethan, who'd learned over years of appointments and procedures, they told a story he didn't want to hear. Sophie's condition is progressing, Dr. Morrison said quietly. Not rapidly, but measurably. The structural abnormality in her heart is creating more strain than it did 6 months ago. We need to start considering more aggressive treatment options. Like what? Surgery is one option. There's a procedure that might improve the blood flow and reduce the strain. It's not without risks, but it could give her years of better quality of life. And if we don't do surgery, we manage with medications and monitoring, but eventually, and I can't tell you when that eventually is, her heart will struggle to keep up with her body's needs, especially as she gets older and more active. Ethan stared at the images on the screen, these pictures of his daughter's failing heart, and felt something inside him crack. How much time do I have to decide? A few weeks? Maybe a month? We're not in crisis mode yet, but we are approaching a decision point. When Sophie emerged from the exam room, she looked small and tired and scared. Ethan scooped her up, too big for this really, but he didn't care, and held her while she cried quietly into his shoulder. I don't want surgery, she whispered. I know, baby. I know. But I'm going to have to, aren't I? He didn't have an answer for that, so he just held her tighter and let her cry while his own heart broke into pieces he wasn't sure how to put back together. They went home instead of getting ice cream. Sophie didn't ask for it, and Ethan didn't offer. Some days were too heavy for small comforts to make a difference. Mrs. Patterson was watering her garden when they pulled into the driveway. She took one look at Ethan's face and came over immediately, still holding her watering can. Bad news? Not good news. He helped Sophie out of the car, noting how she moved more carefully than usual, like she was suddenly aware of her own fragility. We're okay. Just need some quiet time. I made lasagna yesterday. Too much for just me. I'll bring some over later. You don't have to... Ethan. Mrs. Patterson's voice was gentle but firm. Let people help you. You don't have to carry everything alone. Inside, Sophie went straight to her room without being asked. Ethan heard the door close softly, then the sound of her music player starting up. She liked to listen to movie soundtracks when she was upset, orchestral pieces that swelled and crashed like emotional weather systems. He stood in the kitchen, staring at the pile of medical bills that had somehow multiplied overnight. The surgery Dr. Morrison mentioned would cost somewhere between $60,000 and $90,000, depending on complications. Insurance would cover some of it. Maybe half, if he was lucky. The rest would fall on him. His new salary at Meridian was good. Great, even. But not great enough to absorb that kind of debt without drowning. Ethan pulled out his phone and started doing math he didn't want to do. Payment plans, interest rates. How many years it would take to pay off a surgery that might buy Sophie a better life. The numbers blurred together until he had to set the phone down and press his palms against his eyes. A text message buzzed through. Vanessa Whitmore. Adrian mentioned you took Sophie for tests this morning. Hope everything went okay. Take tomorrow off too if you need it. He stared at the message for a long time before responding. Tests showed her condition is getting worse. Might need surgery soon. I'll be in on Friday. The reply came within seconds. I'm so sorry. If there's anything I can do, anything at all, please let me know. Ethan almost laughed. What could she do? Write a check for Sophie's surgery? Fix a broken heart with the same efficiency she managed corporate crises? Some problems didn't have solutions, just increasingly difficult choices. He set the phone aside and went to check on Sophie. She was lying on her bed, staring at the ceiling while an orchestral version of something from a superhero movie played softly from her speaker. Can I come in? She nodded without looking at him. Ethan sat on the edge of her bed, not touching her, just being present. They stayed like that for a while, the music filling the silence between them. I'm scared, Sophie said finally. Me too. Really? You never seem scared. I'm terrified all the time. I just try not to show it, because that's what parents do. We pretend we have everything under control, even when we're falling apart inside. Sophie rolled onto her side to look at him. That sounds exhausting. It really is. Dad? Yeah, baby? If I have the surgery and it doesn't work, what happens? The question felt like a punch to the chest. Let's not think about that right now. But I need to know, what happens to you if I'm not here? Ethan's throat tightened. Sophie, you're going to be fine. Dr. Morrison is the best pediatric cardiologist in the state. The surgery has a very high success rate. But what if... No. His voice came out sharper than he intended. We're not doing this. We're not planning for the worst when we haven't even scheduled the surgery yet. One step at a time, remember? Sophie's eyes filled with tears. I'm just trying to be realistic. You're 8 years old. You shouldn't have to be realistic about your own mortality. The music shifted to something quieter, more melancholy. Ethan pulled Sophie into his arms and held her while she cried properly this time, not the quiet tears from the doctor's office, but the deep, wrenching sobs of a child who understood too much, too young. When she finally calmed down, her voice was muffled against his chest. Can we watch a movie? Something stupid and funny where nobody dies? Yeah, we can do that. They spent the rest of the afternoon on the couch watching animated films about talking animals and unlikely friendships. Mrs. Patterson brought the lasagna around 5, along with homemade bread and a chocolate cake she claimed was left over from a church potluck that Ethan suspected she'd made specifically for them. You're a terrible liar, he told her at the door. And you're a stubborn man who needs to eat actual food occasionally. Take the cake, Ethan. After dinner, Sophie's energy flagged noticeably. The tests had taken more out of her than either of them wanted to admit. Ethan gave her the evening medications, checked her vitals, and got her ready for bed an hour earlier than usual. Will you stay until I fall asleep? She asked. Of course. He read to her from the Dragon Book, though neither of them was really paying attention to the story. Sophie's breathing gradually deepened and the worry lines around her eyes smoothed out as sleep took over. Ethan kept reading anyway, his voice steady and low, until he was certain she was fully under. The cardiac monitor beeped its familiar rhythm. Fast, but stable. He watched the numbers for a few minutes, these digital representations of his daughter's struggling heart, and felt the weight of every decision he'd ever made pressing down on him. His phone buzzed in his pocket. He stepped into the hallway before checking it. Adrian Shaw. A voice message instead of text. "Hey Ethan, it's Adrian. I know you're dealing with family stuff, but I wanted to give you a heads up. The DIA sent over their weekly report, and they're not happy with the current performance levels. They're talking about pulling their contracts if we can't guarantee stability within 2 weeks instead of 4. Whitmore is pushing back, but I thought you should know. Call me when you can." 2 weeks. They wanted a month's worth of delicate integration work done in half the time because they didn't like being inconvenienced by the consequences of their own oversight. Ethan deleted the message without responding. Whatever fires were burning at Meridian would still be burning tomorrow. Right now, he needed to focus on the only thing that actually mattered. He spent the evening researching pediatric cardiac surgery, success rates, recovery timelines, potential complications. The information was simultaneously reassuring and terrifying. Most kids came through fine, but some didn't, and there was no way to know which category Sophie would fall into until they were already committed to the choice. Around 10 p.m., his phone rang. Vanessa Whitmore. He almost didn't answer, then thought better of it. "Hello? Ethan, I'm sorry to call so late. Adrian told me about the DIA situation. I wanted you to know I'm handling it. You don't need to worry about work right now." "That's generous, but they're asking for something that isn't possible. You can't compress a 4-week integration timeline into 2 weeks without breaking things." "I know. I've been reading your technical documentation. I don't understand most of it, but I understand enough to know they're being unreasonable." "So what are you going to tell them?" "That they can accept the 4-week timeline, or they can take their contracts somewhere else. We're not rushing critical infrastructure work to accommodate their impatience." Ethan sat down on the couch, surprised. "You're willing to lose federal contracts over this?" "I'm willing to stand behind my chief systems architect's professional judgment. You said 4 weeks. I believe you." "They might actually leave. Then we'll survive without them." "Ethan, I've spent the last week learning what you built here. This company exists because of your infrastructure. The federal contracts exist because your work made them possible. I'm not going to let bureaucrats who don't understand any of that pressure you into cutting corners while you're dealing with a family crisis." He didn't know what to say to that. "How's Sophie?" Vanessa asked into the silence. "Scared. She might need surgery soon. I don't know when yet. We're still processing the information. What can I do to help?" "Nothing. There's nothing anyone can do." "Ethan." Her voice was quiet but steady. "I know we got off to a terrible start. I know I have a long way to go before I earn your trust, but I need you to understand something. You're not just an employee to me anymore. You're someone I respect, someone whose work I depend on, and someone who deserves better than what this company has given you. So if there's anything, and I mean anything, that would make this situation easier for you and Sophie, please tell me." "Why do you care?" "Because I made a mistake, a huge one. I fired a brilliant engineer because I didn't bother to look past the surface. And then I watched you save this company from a disaster I created, and I realized that being a good CEO isn't about making efficient decisions based on metrics. It's about understanding the people who make the work possible. You showed up for us when you had every reason to walk away. The least I can do is show up for you now." Ethan closed his eyes. "The surgery is going to cost between $60,000 and $90,000 after insurance. I'm trying to figure out how to pay for it without destroying what's left of our financial stability. Does Meridian's health insurance not cover it?" "It covers some, not enough." Vanessa was quiet for a moment. "Our executive health plan has different coverage, better coverage. You should qualify for it now that you're chief systems architect. Let me check with HR tomorrow and see what we can do." "I don't need charity." "It's not charity. It's the benefits package that should have been yours from the beginning if we'd properly recognized your role. You built this company's foundation, Ethan. The least we can do is make sure you can take care of your daughter. After they hung up, Ethan sat in the dark living room and let himself feel something dangerously close to hope again. Maybe things could work out. Maybe people could change. Maybe the world wasn't quite as cold and indifferent as he'd learned to expect. Friday morning came too fast. Ethan woke to his alarm at 6:30, feeling like he'd barely slept. Sophie was already awake, sitting at the kitchen table with her cereal, looking more tired than any 8-year-old should. "You don't have to go to work today," she said. "Mrs. Whitmore said you could stay home." "How do you know what Mrs. Whitmore said?" "I heard you on the phone last night. The walls are thin." "You should have been asleep." "I was trying. My brain wouldn't shut up." Ethan poured coffee and sat across from her. "I need to go in for a few hours. There's some important work that can't wait, but I'll be home by noon, okay? We can do whatever you want this afternoon."
"Can we just stay home and do nothing?" "Yeah, we can do that." The drive to Meridian felt longer than usual. Ethan's brain kept drifting to surgery statistics and financial calculations instead of staying focused on the road. He arrived at 7:45 and went straight to his office, avoiding the morning crowd in the hallways. Marcus Chen from HR knocked on his door at 8:15. "Mr. Cole, do you have a minute?" "Sure." Marcus came in carrying a folder thick with paperwork. "Ms. Whitmore asked me to review your benefits package. You're currently enrolled in our standard plan, which is what we had you on as a maintenance technician. But as chief systems architect, you qualify for the executive tier." He laid out the paperwork on Ethan's desk. "The executive plan has no coverage caps, no exclusions for experimental treatments, and significantly lower out-of-pocket maximums. If Sophie needs surgery, your total cost would be capped at $5,000, regardless of actual expenses." Ethan stared at the documents. "5,000? That's correct. I've already started the enrollment process. It'll be active within 48 hours, backdated to your start date in the new position. Any claims submitted after that will be processed under the new plan." "Why are you doing this?" Marcus looked uncomfortable. "Because it's the right thing to do, and because I was part of the decision to fire you, and I need to live with that. This doesn't make it right, but at least it's something." After Marcus left, Ethan sat alone in his office and allowed himself 5 minutes to completely fall apart. He put his head in his hands and cried quietly, the relief so overwhelming it hurt. $5,000. He could manage $5,000. Sophie could have the surgery without him having to choose between her health and keeping a roof over their heads. The knock on his door came at 8:30. Jennifer Park, looking apologetic. "Sorry to interrupt, but we've got a situation in the server room. One of the integration protocols is throwing errors we don't understand." Ethan wiped his eyes quickly and stood up. "Show me." The next 3 hours disappeared into technical problem solving. The error was exactly the kind of thing Ethan had warned about, a conflict between old and new authentication systems that created cascading failures if not handled correctly. He walked the team through the solution, explaining not just what to do, but why it worked, teaching them to think through the architecture instead of just applying fixes they didn't understand. By 11:30, the problem was resolved and documented. Ethan was gathering his things to leave when Vanessa appeared in the doorway of the conference room. "Can I talk to you for a minute, privately?" They walked to her office. She closed the door and gestured for him to sit. "Marcus told me about the benefits enrollment. I wanted to make sure you understood that wasn't charity or special treatment. That's the standard package for your position." "I understand, thank you." "There's something else." Vanessa pulled out a folder from her desk. "The board met this morning. They want to formalize your role with a contract that guarantees certain protections." She slid the folder across to him. 5-year agreement. Guaranteed position as chief systems architect. Salary increases tied to company performance. And most importantly, protection from termination except for cause, with cause being very specifically defined as gross misconduct or criminal activity. Basically, nobody can fire you again just because they don't understand your value. Ethan opened the folder and scanned the contract. The terms were better than anything he'd expected, generous without being unbelievable. Why? Because the board finally understands what I should have understood from the beginning. This company runs on infrastructure you built. Without you, we're one bad update away from catastrophic failure. They want you to have every reason to stay. And if I say no, then you say no. But I hope you won't. Vanessa leaned forward. "Ethan, I know trust has to be earned.
I know I destroyed whatever trust existed between us when I fired you, but I'm asking you to give us a chance to prove we've learned from that mistake. Stay. Help us build something better. And let us support you while you take care of Sophie. He thought about the past 2 weeks. The firing. The crisis. The slow, painful rebuilding of something that felt almost like respect. Sophie's diagnosis and the crushing weight of decisions he couldn't make alone. I need to think about it. Take the weekend. Take longer if you need it. The offer isn't going anywhere. Ethan left the building at noon carrying the contract folder and a head full of complicated emotions. The drive home took him past the ice cream shop where he and Sophie had sat just a few days ago, eating chocolate chip and coffee while the world felt slightly less impossible. He pulled into the driveway at 12:20. Mrs. Patterson was on her porch again, this time reading what looked like a romance novel. "You're home early," she called. "Promised Sophie I would be."
She's a lucky girl, having a father who keeps his promises. Inside, Sophie was on the couch building something elaborate with blocks. She looked up when he entered, and her whole face brightened. "You came back." "I said I would." "I know, but sometimes grown-ups say things and then they don't actually do them." Ethan sat down beside her, careful not to knock over her block construction. "What are you building?" "A castle, with a tower for dragons to live in, and a moat, and a drawbridge that actually works." "That's ambitious." "Emma says I always make things too complicated, but I think complicated things are more interesting." They spent the afternoon working on the block castle together. Ethan helped engineer the drawbridge mechanism, while Sophie decorated the towers with colored paper flags. It was simple, mindless work that required just enough focus to keep the fear at bay. Around 4 p.m., Sophie's energy started flagging. She didn't complain, just gradually moved slower, her breathing slightly more labored. Ethan checked her vitals, heart rate elevated but not dangerously so, and suggested they take a break. "Can we talk about the surgery?" Sophie asked while they sat together on the couch. "What do you want to know?" "Everything. I don't want to be surprised." So Ethan explained it as gently as he could. The procedure, the recovery, the risks. Sophie listened with the kind of serious attention she usually reserved for things like math homework or instructions for complicated art projects. "And after?" she asked. "If it works?" "Then your heart works better. You'll have more energy. You won't get tired as easily. You might even be able to play sports if you want to." "I don't really like sports, but it would be nice to play kickball at recess without feeling like I'm dying." "Yeah, it would." Sophie was quiet for a moment, thinking. "Okay, I'll do it. The surgery. If Dr. Morrison says I should." "You're sure?" "No, but I don't think I'm ever going to be sure, so I might as well just decide and get it over with." Ethan pulled her close, this brave, scared little girl who kept finding courage in impossible places. "I'm so proud of you, even though I'm scared." "Especially because you're scared. Being brave doesn't mean you're not afraid. It means you're afraid, and you do the hard thing anyway." That evening, after Sophie was asleep and the house was quiet except for the familiar beep of the cardiac monitor, Ethan pulled out the contract folder from Meridian. He read through it carefully, looking for catches or hidden clauses that would make the generous terms make sense. There weren't any. It was exactly what Vanessa had said, a genuine offer that protected him and gave him stability he hadn't had in years. His phone buzzed. Adrian Shaw, DIA, backed down. Accepted the 4-week timeline. Vanessa told them to take it or leave it, and they blinked first. "Thought you'd want to know." Ethan texted back, "Good." Then another message from Adrian. "She's fighting for you, you know, harder than I've ever seen her fight for anything. Whatever happened between you two, she's determined to make it right." Ethan didn't respond to that. He set the phone down and looked around his small rental house with its drafty windows and struggling AC and kitchen full of medical bills. This place had been home for 4 years, but it had always felt temporary, like they were just passing through on their way to somewhere better. Maybe somewhere better was finally within reach. Saturday morning, Ethan called Dr. Morrison's office and scheduled Sophie's surgery for 3 weeks out. It gave them time to prepare mentally and physically, and it aligned with the completion of Meridian's infrastructure integration. Everything happening at once, all the difficult things compressed into a window where he could focus completely without work pulling him in different directions. Sophie took the news calmly. 3 weeks. That's not very long. No, it's not. But it's long enough to do some fun stuff first, right? Before everything gets scary? Yeah, we can do that. They made a list together. Simple things that wouldn't overtax Sophie's heart, but would create memories to carry them through the hard parts ahead. The children's museum, the aquarium, a special dinner at the fancy pancake place Sophie loved. Movie marathons and late bedtime, and all the small rebellions against normal routines that made life feel less ordinary. Can we invite Mrs. Patterson to the pancake place? Sophie asked. She's been really nice to us. That's a good idea. Sunday evening, Ethan sat down at his laptop and wrote an email to Vanessa Whitmore. I'll sign the contract. Thank you for believing I was worth fighting for. I'll be in Monday morning to finalize everything and continue the integration work. Also, I need to block off time in 3 weeks for Sophie's surgery. I'll be out for at least a week, possibly 2 depending on her recovery. I know that's not ideal timing, but it's necessary. The response came within 10 minutes. Take whatever time you need. We'll manage. And Ethan, Sophie is lucky to have you as her father. I hope the surgery goes perfectly. Monday morning arrived with clear skies and the kind of crisp autumn air that made everything feel full of possibility. Ethan dropped Sophie at school and drove to Meridian with the signed contract in his backpack. Marcus Chen processed the paperwork with quiet efficiency. Adrian Shaw shook his hand and welcomed him officially to the leadership team. Jennifer Park and Kyle Chen and the rest of the engineering team looked genuinely happy to have him there permanently. And Vanessa Whitmore smiled when she saw the signed contract, a real smile that reached her eyes. Welcome to Meridian, Mr. Cole. Officially this time. Thank you for the second chance. Thank you for taking it. The next 3 weeks were a blur of technical work and family time. Ethan threw himself into the infrastructure integration with the kind of focused intensity he hadn't felt in years. The work was challenging and consuming, and exactly what his brain needed to stay occupied instead of spiraling into fear about Sophie's surgery. The engineering team started to gel into something that felt like actual collaboration instead of just people working in proximity. Jennifer became his unofficial second-in-command, smart enough to challenge his ideas and confident enough to push back when she thought he was wrong. Kyle developed into a talented debugger who could spot problems before they became critical. Even the junior engineers who'd been skeptical at first started bringing him their questions instead of trying to solve everything themselves. Vanessa checked in regularly but never hovered. She gave him space to work while making it clear she was available if he needed anything. The dynamic between them shifted from adversarial to something that almost resembled mutual respect. At home, Ethan and Sophie worked through their list of fun things. The children's museum on a Wednesday afternoon when it was nearly empty. The aquarium on a Sunday morning, watching jellyfish pulse through their tank like alien heartbeats. The fancy pancake place with Mrs. Patterson, who ordered the most elaborate thing on the menu and insisted on paying for everyone. Sophie grew quieter as the surgery date approached, but not in a way that worried Ethan. She was processing, thinking through what was coming, preparing herself mentally for the hardest thing she'd ever had to do. 2 days before the surgery, she asked him to sit down with her at the kitchen table. I wrote something, she said, pushing a folded piece of paper across to him, in case something goes wrong. Sophie, I know you don't want to think about it, but I need you to have this, just in case. Ethan unfolded the paper with hands that weren't quite steady. Sophie's handwriting, careful and deliberate. Dad, if you're reading this, it means something bad happened. I'm sorry. I know you're going to be really sad, and that's okay, but I need you to know some things. First, I love you more than anything in the whole world. You're the best dad anyone could ever have. Second, it's not your fault. You did everything you could. You always do. Third, I need you to keep living. Don't just stop because I'm gone. Find something that makes you happy. Maybe even find someone to love who isn't a sick kid who makes everything complicated. Fourth, finish building cool things. You're really good at it, and the world needs people who build things that work. Love forever, Sophie. Ethan read it twice before he could trust himself to speak. You're not going to need this. The surgery is going to be fine. Probably, but just in case. He folded the letter carefully and put it in his wallet, right next to her school picture. Thank you for writing it, but I'm not going to need it. Okay, Sophie smiled, relieved to have it done. Can we watch a movie now? Something with dragons? The night before the surgery, Ethan barely slept. He checked Sophie's vitals every hour, watched her breathe, counted the beats of her fragile heart. She slept peacefully through his vigil, dreaming whatever dreams 8-year-olds had the night before their world changed forever.
At 5 a.m., he finally gave up on sleep and made coffee. The surgery was scheduled for 8:30. They needed to be at the hospital by 7 for pre-op. That gave him 2.5 hours to hold it together and be strong for his daughter. Sophie woke at 6, unusually quiet. Ethan helped her dress in comfortable clothes and gathered the bag of things she'd need for recovery. Her favorite stuffed rabbit, the Dragon Book, a blanket from home that smelled familiar. In the car driving through the early morning streets to the children's hospital, Sophie reached for his hand.
Dad? Yeah, baby? I'm really scared. Me too. But we're going to be okay, right? Both of us? Ethan looked at his daughter in the rearview mirror, this brave, terrified little girl who kept finding reasons to hope even when hope seemed impossible. Yeah, he said, and made himself believe it. We're going to be okay. The hospital rose ahead of them, white and sterile and full of people who would try to fix what was broken. Ethan pulled into the parking garage and turned off the engine. For a moment, they just sat there, father and daughter, facing the biggest challenge of their lives, together. Then Sophie unbuckled her seatbelt and said, "Okay, let's do this." And they walked into the hospital to meet whatever came next. The pre-op room was smaller than Ethan expected, with walls painted a shade of blue that was probably meant to be calming, but just looked institutional. Sophie sat on the hospital bed in a gown that was 3 sizes too big, her legs swinging nervously while a nurse checked her vitals for the 3rd time. "Heart rate's a little elevated," the nurse said, making a note on her tablet. "But that's normal. Everyone's nervous before surgery." "I'm not nervous," Sophie lied. "I'm just cold." The nurse smiled and brought her a heated blanket. "Better?" "A little." Dr. Morrison arrived at 7:40, accompanied by the cardiac surgeon who'd be performing the procedure. Dr. Richard Hayes was in his early 50s, with the kind of steady calm that came from doing complicated things successfully for decades. "Sophie, Mr. Cole." He shook both their hands. "I've reviewed all of Sophie's scans and test results. This is a straightforward repair procedure. We'll be correcting the structural abnormality that's causing the blood flow restriction. The surgery typically takes 3 to 4 hours, and recovery is usually smooth for patients Sophie's age." "What's the success rate?" Ethan asked, though he'd already researched this number obsessively. For this specific procedure, about 94% of patients experience significant improvement in cardiac function. Complications are rare, and when they do occur, they're usually manageable. 94%. Those were good odds, great odds even. But they also meant 6% of families got news that destroyed them. Dr. Hayes seemed to read his thoughts. "I know statistics don't make this less scary, but I've performed this surgery 47 times. I'm very good at it. And Sophie is young, otherwise healthy, and strong. She's an ideal candidate." Sophie looked up at the surgeon. "Will it hurt when I wake up?" "You'll be sore for a few days, but we'll give you medicine to help with the pain. And you'll have nurses watching you constantly to make sure you're comfortable." "Okay." Sophie's voice was small but steady. "I'm ready." The anesthesiologist came in next, explaining the process in simple terms Sophie could understand. She'd go to sleep in this room, then wake up in recovery. She wouldn't remember anything in between. "Can my dad stay with me until I fall asleep?" Sophie asked. "Absolutely." They wheeled Sophie's bed down the hallway toward the operating room, Ethan walking alongside holding her hand. The surgical suite was all stainless steel and bright lights and equipment that looked more like something from a spacecraft than a hospital. The anesthesiologist positioned a mask over Sophie's face. "Okay, sweetheart, I need you to take some deep breaths for me. Count backwards from 10. Sophie's eyes found Ethan's. 10, 9, 8. Her grip on his hand loosened. Her eyes fluttered closed. 7, 6. And then she was gone, her hand going slack in his, her breathing deep and mechanical under the anesthesia. "She's under," the anesthesiologist confirmed. "We'll take good care of her, Mr. Cole. You can wait in the surgical waiting room. We'll update you every hour." Ethan stood there for a moment, looking at his daughter's unconscious face, this small person who trusted him to make impossible decisions. Then he leaned down and kissed her forehead. "See you soon, baby." The surgical waiting room was designed for people in crisis,
Comfortable chairs that couldn't quite make you comfortable. Magazines nobody could focus enough to read. A coffee station with the kind of bitter, burned coffee that tasted like anxiety in liquid form. Ethan claimed a chair in the corner and pulled out his phone. 8:15 a.m. 3 to 4 hours, Dr. Hayes had said. That meant Sophie should be out of surgery by noon at the earliest, 1 p.m. at the latest. A text from Vanessa appeared at 8:30. Thinking of you and Sophie this morning. You've got this. She's got this. Then Adrian. Good luck today. Let me know if you need anything. Jennifer Park. The whole engineering team is rooting for Sophie. We've got work covered. Don't worry about anything here. Even Marcus Chen from HR sending positive thoughts. Take all the time you need. Ethan read each message twice, surprised by how much they meant. A month ago, most of these people hadn't known he existed. Now they were checking in, showing up, caring about whether his daughter survived surgery. Mrs. Patterson arrived at 9 a.m. carrying a thermos of actual good coffee and a bag of homemade muffins. You shouldn't have come, Ethan said, though he was desperately glad she had. Where else would I be? Sophie's like a granddaughter to me. And you look like you need someone to sit with you so you don't completely fall apart. I'm fine. You're a mess. Drink the coffee, eat a muffin, let me be useful. They sat together in silence for a while, the kind of comfortable quiet that came from years of knowing each other through the hard parts. Mrs. Patterson had been there when Sophie's mother died. She'd been there through medical emergencies and late-night panics and all the small catastrophes of raising a sick child alone. She's going to be okay, Mrs. Patterson said quietly. That girl is tougher than both of us combined. She wrote me a letter, in case she doesn't make it. Of course she did. She's your daughter, practical even when she's terrified. Mrs. Patterson poured more coffee into Ethan's cup. But you won't need it. She's going to come through this surgery and spend the next decade complaining about the scar and making you feel guilty every time she wants something. Ethan almost smiled. That sounds about right. The first hour update came at 9:30. A surgical nurse appeared in the waiting room doorway. Mr. Cole? Sophie's doing great. They've started the repair work. Everything is proceeding normally. Thank you. The nurse disappeared back through the secure doors, leaving Ethan with another hour to fill before the next update. He tried to work, pulling out his laptop and reviewing infrastructure documentation. But the words blurred together. He tried to read, tried to watch something on his phone. Nothing held his attention for more than a few minutes. Mrs. Patterson eventually forced him to eat a muffin, then another, her philosophy being that nobody should face tragedy on an empty stomach. 10:30. Another update. Still proceeding normally. 11:30. Repair work complete. They were closing now. Sophie's vitals looked excellent. At 12:15, Dr. Hayes appeared in the waiting room, still wearing his surgical scrubs. Ethan stood up so fast he nearly knocked over his coffee. She did beautifully, Dr. Hayes said immediately. The surgery went exactly as planned. We corrected the structural abnormality, and her heart is already showing improved function. She's in recovery now. You can see her in about 20 minutes. The relief hit Ethan like a physical force. His knees actually buckled slightly, and Mrs. Patterson's hand gripped his arm to steady him. She's okay? She's more than okay. She came through perfectly. The next few days will be about managing pain and monitoring for any complications, but I'm very optimistic about her recovery. After Dr. Hayes left, Ethan sat back down and put his head in his hands. Mrs. Patterson's arm went around his shoulders. Told you, she said softly. That girl is tough. They let him into the recovery room at 12:40. Sophie was still unconscious, her small body dwarfed by the hospital bed and surrounded by monitors and IV lines. A fresh bandage covered her chest. Her face was pale but peaceful. Ethan pulled a chair up beside the bed and took her hand carefully, mindful of the IV. Her fingers were cool, but her pulse was strong and steady. Hey, Soph, he whispered. You did it. Surgery's over. You were so brave. She didn't respond, still deep under anesthesia. But Ethan sat there holding her hand anyway, keeping watch, being present for the moment when she woke up and needed to know she wasn't alone. She started stirring around 2 p.m. Small movements at first, then her eyes fluttering open, confused and unfocused. Dad? Right here, baby. I'm right here. Did they do it? The surgery? Yeah, it's all done. Dr. Hayes said you did perfectly. Sophie's eyes drifted closed again. Good. I'm really tired. I know. You can sleep.
I'll be here when you wake up. The next 3 days existed in a blur of hospital routines and careful monitoring. Sophie's pain was manageable with medication. Her vitals stayed stable. By the second day, she was awake enough to complain about the food and asked for her tablet so she could watch movies. Dr. Hayes visited each morning, checking her incision and reviewing her cardiac function data with obvious satisfaction. She's healing remarkably well, he told Ethan on day 3. If this continues, we might be able to send her home by the end of the week. Ethan had been sleeping in a chair beside Sophie's bed, leaving only for quick showers and coffee runs. The hospital staff kept telling him to go home and rest, but he couldn't make himself leave. Not yet. Not until he was absolutely certain she was out of danger. Vanessa came to visit on the 3rd day, bringing flowers and a stuffed dragon that was almost as big as Sophie. The whole office wanted to come, she explained. But I told them to wait until you were home and Sophie was feeling better. I hope that's okay. That's fine. Thank you for the dragon. She'll love it. Vanessa looked at Sophie, who was dozing lightly, then back at Ethan. You look exhausted. I'm okay. When's the last time you slept more than 2 hours straight? I don't know. Tuesday? Ethan. Her voice was gentle but firm. You can't take care of her if you collapse. Go home tonight. Get real sleep in a real bed. The nurses here are excellent. They'll call if anything changes. I can't leave her. Yes, you can. Sophie needs you healthy and functional, not running on fumes and hospital coffee. Sophie's eyes opened. She's right, Dad. You look terrible. Thanks, baby. Very supportive. I'm serious. Your eyes are all red, and you keep spacing out in the middle of sentences. Go home, sleep. I'll still be here tomorrow. That night, after Sophie had eaten dinner and settled in with a movie, Ethan finally let Mrs. Patterson drive him home. The house felt strange after 3 days away. Too quiet. Too empty. He showered, ate real food for the first time in days, and collapsed into his own bed. Sleep hit him like a freight train. He woke 9 hours later to sunlight streaming through the windows and his phone ringing. The hospital. His heart jumped into his throat as he answered. Mr. Cole? This is Nurse Sarah from the cardiac unit. Everything's fine, she added quickly. Sophie had a good night, but she's asking for you and refusing to eat breakfast until you get here. I'll be there in 30 minutes. Sophie was sitting up in bed when he arrived, looking more alert than she had since the surgery. Her color was better. She was breathing easier. You look less dead, she announced. Good morning to you, too. Dr. Hayes says I might get to go home tomorrow if my numbers stay good today. That's great news. Can we stop for milkshakes on the way home, the chocolate ones from that place by our house? We'll see what Dr. Hayes says about your diet. Sophie made a face. Adults always say, we'll see, when they mean no. They did go home the next day with a thick packet of discharge instructions and enough medications to fill a small pharmacy. Sophie moved carefully, protecting her chest, but she walked out of the hospital on her own 2 feet instead of being wheeled, which felt like a victory. The first week home was hard. Sophie's pain was worse at night. She had nightmares about the surgery that left her crying and confused. Ethan slept on the floor beside her bed most nights, ready to help when she needed him. But gradually, day by day, she got stronger. The pain decreased. Her energy returned. 2 weeks after surgery, Dr. Morrison did a follow-up examination and declared herself thrilled with Sophie's progress. Her cardiac function is better than it's been in years, she told them. The repair was a complete success. She'll need monitoring as she grows, but this should give her decades of normal heart function. Sophie looked up at Ethan. Does that mean I can play kickball? Let's start with walking around the block and work our way up to kickball. You're no fun. But she was smiling, and her eyes were bright, and she looked like a kid who had a future worth planning for. Ethan returned to work 3 weeks after the surgery, easing back into normal hours while Sophie recovered at home with Mrs. Patterson during the day. The infrastructure integration was complete. The federal agencies had stopped complaining. Everything at Meridian was running smoothly. His first day back, the engineering team had decorated his office with a banner that said, "Welcome back," and a card everyone had signed. Jennifer had even baked cookies. We missed you, she said simply. Also, we had questions nobody else could answer. I was gone 3 weeks. It felt longer. That afternoon, Vanessa called him into her office. How's Sophie? Better every day. Dr. Morrison says the surgery was a complete success. That's wonderful. I'm so glad. Vanessa pulled out a folder.
I wanted to talk to you about something. The board has been discussing the company's direction, and we all agree that we need to invest more heavily in our core infrastructure. We want to create a dedicated department focused on the foundational systems, basically formalizing the work you've been doing. Okay. We'd like you to head that department. You'd have a team of 15 engineers reporting to you, full budget authority for infrastructure projects, and a seat on the executive leadership team. Ethan stared at her. You want me on the executive team? You built this company's foundation. You saved us from a catastrophic failure. And you've spent the last 2 months rebuilding the trust that we destroyed. Yes, I want you on the executive team. You've earned it.
What about my hours? I still need to... 9 to 5, just like we agreed, no exceptions. Your daughter comes first, always. Ethan thought about the past month, the surgery, the fear, the people who'd shown up when he needed them, the company that had fired him and then fought to bring him back. I'll do it, he said, but I need one more thing.
Name it. If we're going to build a real infrastructure department, I want to hire people who understand what it's like to need flexibility. Single parents, people with family obligations, folks who've been overlooked because they don't fit the traditional model of what an engineer looks like. Vanessa smiled. I think that's an excellent idea. Over the next few months, Ethan built something he'd never had before. A team that functioned like a team. People who trusted each other, challenged each other, and showed up for each other when things got hard. Jennifer became his deputy, bringing organizational skills and emotional intelligence that balanced his technical focus. Kyle developed into a brilliant systems architect in his own right. They hired 3 single parents, 2 people with chronic health conditions, and 1 guy who'd been fired from his last job for taking too much time off to care for his elderly mother. The team worked normal hours. They took their kids to doctor's appointments without apologizing. They supported each other through crises and celebrated each other's victories, and the work they produced was better than anything Meridian had ever seen. Sophie went back to school 6 weeks after surgery. Her first day back, she came home excited about everything she'd missed and everything she could finally do now that her heart worked properly. Emma and I ran around the whole playground at recess, she announced, and I wasn't even tired after. It was amazing. Ethan looked at his daughter, flushed and happy and full of energy, and felt something in his chest finally unclenched. She was going to be okay. They were both going to be okay. That's great, Soph. I'm proud of you. Can I try out for soccer in the spring? Dr. Morrison said maybe I could play sports now. We'll talk to her about it. But yeah, maybe. Sophie threw her arms around him in a hug that nearly knocked him over. This is the best day ever. That evening, after Sophie was asleep, Ethan sat on the back porch with a beer and his phone. He scrolled through photos from the past few months. Sophie before surgery, pale and tired. Sophie in the hospital, recovering. Sophie last week climbing trees in Mrs. Patterson's backyard like her heart had never been broken. His phone rang. Adrian Shaw. Hey, got a minute? Sure, what's up? Vanessa wanted me to give you a heads up. The board approved the infrastructure department budget. You're getting everything you asked for. 15 positions, full equipment upgrades, dedicated server space for testing. It's official. That's great. There's more. They want to name it after you. The Coal Infrastructure Division. Vanessa pushed for it, said if we're going to build something important, it should carry the name of the person who made it possible. Ethan was quiet for a long moment. That's not necessary. Maybe not, but it's happening anyway. You changed this company, Ethan, changed how we think about what's important and how we treat the people who make the work possible. That deserves recognition. After they hung up, Ethan sat in the quiet darkness thinking about the past 2 months, about being fired, about Sophie's surgery, about the slow, difficult process of rebuilding trust with people who'd failed him. He thought about the younger version of himself, the one who'd built Meridian's infrastructure with such pride and confidence, that Ethan had believed success meant building perfect systems that never failed. This Ethan knew better. Success wasn't about perfection. It was about building things that could survive being broken and finding people who'd help you put the pieces back together. The next morning, Ethan woke to Sophie shaking his shoulder. Dad, wake up. It snowed. He looked out the window, the first snow of the season, covering everything in clean white silence. Can we build a snowman before you go to work? Sophie asked. Ethan checked the clock. 6:30 a.m. He needed to leave for work by 8 to make it on time for the morning meeting.
Yeah, he said. We can build a snowman.
They bundled up in coats and gloves and went outside while the world was still quiet. The snow was perfect for packing, and they built a snowman that was slightly lopsided but definitely had character. Sophie decorated it with rocks for eyes and a carrot nose and one of Ethan's old scarves. Then she stood back to admire their work. It's pretty good, right? It's excellent. Even though it's kind of crooked? Especially because it's crooked. Perfect things are boring.
Sophie considered this. Is that why you like me? Because I'm crooked? Ethan pulled her close, his heart full of more things than he had words for. I like you because you're brave and smart and funny and kind. And because you're mine. Even when my heart was broken? Especially then.
They stood together in the snow, looking at their crooked snowman while the sun started to rise over the neighborhood. Somewhere in the distance, Ethan's phone was probably buzzing with work emails and meeting reminders and all the normal demands of normal life. But right now, in this moment, the only thing that mattered was standing in the snow with his daughter, who'd survived impossible things and come out stronger. We should go inside, Ethan said eventually. You're going to be late for school. 5 more minutes? Yeah, 5 more minutes. Because that was the thing about being a parent, about building a life worth living. Sometimes the most important thing you could do was stand in the snow for 5 more minutes with your kid, letting work wait, letting the world wait, choosing presence over productivity. Sometimes the bravest thing wasn't saving companies or fixing broken systems or solving impossible problems. Sometimes it was just showing up, being there, loving someone enough to keep trying even when everything was hard. Ethan had spent years thinking he was just surviving, just getting through each day without completely falling apart. But standing there in the snow with Sophie, he realized he'd been doing something much more important. He'd been building a life, imperfect and messy and full of hard choices, but real, authentic, worth fighting for. And in the end, that was all anyone could really do. Show up for the people who mattered, do the work that needed doing, build things that could survive being broken, keep loving even when love meant making impossible decisions, and living with the consequences. 6 months later, Sophie played her first soccer game. She wasn't the fastest or the most coordinated, but she ran the entire field without getting tired, her repaired heart keeping perfect time. Ethan watched from the sidelines with Mrs. Patterson and half the engineering team, who'd all shown up to support Sophie because that's what you did for family. Vanessa Whitmore was there too, sitting on a blanket with her own kids, having learned that the best leaders were the ones who understood that work was important, but life was more important. Sophie scored a goal in the second half. Nothing fancy, just a messy kick that somehow found the net. But the way her face lit up when her teammates mobbed her in celebration was worth more than every success Ethan had ever had in his career. After the game, driving home with Sophie chattering excitedly about every moment, Ethan realized he'd finally built what he'd been searching for all along. Not the perfect infrastructure, not the recognition or the title or the salary, just this. A daughter who was healthy and happy and full of dreams. A job that let him be present for the moments that mattered. People who'd learned that everyone deserved to be seen, to be valued, to be given second chances. And maybe that was the real story all along. Not about the brilliant architect who saved the company, not about the dramatic system failure or the heroic rescue, but about a father who kept showing up, who made impossible choices and lived with the weight of them, who learned that being invisible didn't mean being worthless, and that sometimes the most important work happened in the quiet moments nobody else saw. The systems Ethan built would run for decades, supporting networks and protecting data and enabling all the things modern life required. But the real legacy wasn't the code or the infrastructure or the technical brilliance. It was Sophie, healthy and whole and ready to take on whatever came next. Everything else was just details.